The evening commenced with an invitation for listeners to embark on a tranquil and deliberate exploration of age-old myths and serene historical accounts. Participants were encouraged to lower their ambient lighting, nestle comfortably beneath their blankets, and permit the day's accumulated clamor to recede into the background. Should this soothing expedition prove conducive to relaxation, the audience was subtly prompted to indicate their appreciation and join the growing community, but only if the action felt genuinely aligned with their current state of mind. A request was extended for individuals to share their geographical location and the current local time in the comments section, highlighting the intriguing diversity of a global audience converging within this peaceful collective. Whether individuals were preparing for their nightly repose or carving out a moment of quietude amidst their daily routines, the suggestion was reiterated to further dim illumination, perhaps activating a fan for its gentle rhythmic whir before the narrative gently unfolded. Listeners were invited to conjure an image of an epoch preceding the ubiquitous presence of digital streaming platforms, broadcast television, and even the widespread availability of printed literature. In this bygone era, narratives traversed the social landscape orally, disseminated directly from speaker to hearer, carefully transmitted across successive generations, much like cherished culinary traditions. The Hellenic people of antiquity propagated their rich mythological tapestry through this very means, eschewing grandiose visual spectacles or serialized rapid consumption formats. Instead, their tales were conveyed by spoken words, which drifted softly through spaces illuminated by flickering hearths and amidst convivial outdoor assemblies. Were Greek mythology to be reimagined as a contemporary streaming production, one would undoubtedly encounter an abundance of intricately developed personalities, improbable champions, and narrative arcs that converged in unforeseen manners. Nevertheless, the authentic rendition of these sagas was considerably more measured, more intentional, akin to the unhurried application of golden honey upon a piece of freshly toasted bread. The narrative then proposed a journey to unwind and delve into this ancient realm at the tranquil tempo it inherently merits. The narrative would commence with a primordial tableau of creation, depicted not through explosive digital animations, but rather as a serene unfolding from an initial state of profound disorder, a vast, gaping chasm. This was a realm devoid of ocean, land, or atmosphere, existing purely as unmanifested capacity. From this subtle emptiness emerged Gaia, the very essence of the earth, who majestically extended her form to sculpt the formidable mountains and verdant valleys that one might leisurely traverse during a tranquil afternoon excursion. Within the mythological framework, she was not merely composed of stone and soil, she was the enduring rock and the fertile soil itself, embodying patience and steadfastness. As the listener continued to ease into their comfortable posture, they were invited to envision Gaia giving rise to Uranus, the boundless sky, who would subsequently become her consort. Together, they engendered the Titans, beings who navigated the nascent world not with the frantic urgency characteristic of inhabitants in contemporary urban centers, but with the deliberate, unhurried gait of entities for whom eternity lay boundless before them. The Titans were unburdened by the need to consult timepieces or fret over punctuality. They immersed themselves completely in each passing instant, their substantial footsteps resonant and measured as they traversed the newly formed terrestrial sphere. Among this formidable lineage of Titans was Kronos, destined to ultimately depose his progenitor, Uranus. This monumental shift transpired not amidst a flurry of spectacular combat sequences befitting a contemporary season finale, but rather through an extended, gradual stratagem executed with the meticulous patience of an artisan painstakingly knitting a garment, stitch by careful stitch. Kronos bided his time, anticipating the precise opportune instant. This profound understanding of patience was intrinsically woven into the very fabric of ancient Greek existence. In a civilization bereft of immediate digital communication or rapid transit systems, the act of waiting was simply an inherent component of daily life. Subsequently, Kronos's progeny arrived, the revered deities of Olympus. Zeus and his divine siblings did not erupt onto the cosmic stage accompanied by bombastic orchestral fanfares. Instead, their appearance was a slow, deliberate unveiling, akin to tender seedlings gradually piercing the earth after a soft spring shower. Zeus, fated to ascend as the sovereign of the gods, spent his formative years concealed within a cavern on the island of Crete, absorbing the gentle cadence of water, trickling from stalactites, and the remote, comforting bleating of Amalthea, the nurturing goat who suckled him. The cave's interior was refreshingly cool and subtly illuminated, mirroring the tranquil ambiance of the listener's present surroundings. Zeus would remain ensconced for extensive periods, simply attuning himself to the ambient sounds. The delicate rustling of foliage beyond the entrance, the hushed respiration of his guardians. There was an utter absence of haste, no pressing urgency, merely the unhurried procession of days, each seamlessly merging into the next with quiet grace. When Zeus ultimately confronted his paternal predecessor, Kronos, the ensuing struggle was far from a condensed conflict resolvable within the confines of a single dramatic episode. Instead, it manifested as the Titanomachy, a monumental 10-year war that progressed with the geological slowness of continental drift. Engagements were interspersed with extensive intervals of profound calm, strategic deliberations that spanned multiple days, and hushed nocturnal periods during which adversaries from both factions gazed upon the identical celestial constellations, contemplating their individual roles within the vastness of the cosmos. Following Zeus's definitive triumph, he and his divine siblings proceeded to apportion the world amongst themselves. This allocation was not orchestrated within a corporate boardroom accompanied by bombastic pronouncements. Rather, they simply drew lots, a straightforward exercise in randomness, embracing their respective realms with the subdued solemnity of beings who comprehend that stewardship assumes a multitude of guises. Zeus claimed dominion over the celestial expanse, Poseidon over the aqueous depths, and Hades over the chthonic underworld. There was no celebratory fanfare, merely a profound and quiet acceptance of their destined roles. The narrative then invited a moment of contemplation, encouraging the listener to envision Mount Olympus not as a frenetic operational hub of celestial endeavors, but rather as an ethereal domain where the temporal continuum diverged significantly. The Olympian deities did not precipitously hasten from one impending catastrophe to the next. Instead, they reclined within their resplendent golden chambers, partaking of ambrosial nectar imbued with the essence of sun-drenched honey and the delicate perfume of blossoms that unfurl exclusively under the softest lunar glow. Their discourse flowed gracefully, much like a languidly winding river, encompassing topics both profoundly philosophical and charmingly quotidian, all approached with an equivalent measure of unhurried curiosity. Hera, the venerable consort of Zeus, would dedicate entire afternoons to the art of floristry within her private apartments, meticulously selecting each individual bloom with intentional precision, savoring the velvety texture of petals against her fingertips, and inhaling fragrances so exquisitely faint that only a divine sensibility could truly apprehend them. The audience was prompted to visualize her graceful hands executing their movements with the stately, deliberate pace of clouds, transforming their contours against the sky, as she fashioned arrangements destined to endure for countless decades, impervious to wilting or fading. Athena, the revered deity of sagacity, did not amass her profound understanding through frenzied academic pursuits or instantaneous digital inquiries. Instead, she engaged in protracted contemplation of abstract notions for epochs, meticulously examining concepts within her intellect, as one might gently rotate polished river stones within the palm of a hand. She would frequently repose beneath the boughs of an olive tree, her hallowed botanical emblem, and for extended durations, absorb the subtle murmurs emanating from its silver-green foliage, discerning profound insights within the very interstices of auditory perception. Similarly, Apollo, the divine patron of melody amongst his many attributes, did not craft hastily conceived compositions intended for an inattentive audience. His musical artistry unfurled with the deliberate grace of the earth's changing seasons. Each individual note accorded ample room to fully reverberate and dissolve before the subsequent tone was introduced. To be privileged enough to witness Apollo's performance on the lyre was to transcend all awareness of temporal progression, to simply exist immersed within the serene undulations of pure sound. Were this narrative to be presented as a contemporary digital streaming production, the inclination might be to accelerate towards its most thrilling installments. The legendary Perseus vanquishing Medusa by severing her Gorgon head, or Theseus bravely confronting the monstrous Minotaur. However, in the authentic renditions of these ancient sagas, these celebrated heroes dedicated a considerably greater portion of their existence to unremarkable, everyday occurrences. One might envision Perseus traversing arid, dust-laden pathways, his humble sandals gradually succumbing to wear. Similarly, Theseus could be pictured in quiet contemplation aboard a vessel, observing the indistinct boundary where the vast ocean merged with the boundless firmament. The protagonists of Hellenic mythology were not perpetually embroiled in martial conflicts or passionate amorous entanglements. They routinely prepared modest repasts over crackling campfires, diligently repaired their attire, and reposed sleeplessly through the night, attentive to the nocturnal symphony of insects beyond their rudimentary shelters. Their moments of introspection were often marked by a pervasive sense of doubt that insinuated itself slowly, much like the lengthening shadows of dusk, rather than erupting as abrupt, dramatic existential crises designed for swift resolution within a typical 45-minute televised segment, interspersed with commercial interruptions. The narrative then shifted focus to the legendary figure of Odysseus, whose arduous homeward voyage from the ruins of Troy spanned a decade. While contemporary reinterpretations often prioritize the sensational episodes, the perilous encounter with the Cyclops, the enchanting yet deadly allure of the sirens, and other dramatic confrontations, the substantial majority of Odysseus's epic journey was, in truth, replete with more subdued and introspective instances. These included meticulously observing the celestial ballet of stars for navigational guidance, discerning the worn grain of the timber railing beneath his seasoned hands, and recounting ancient sagas to his loyal crew as their vessel glided through placid waters. One was invited to conceive of interminable days at sea, where no momentous event transpired whatsoever, marked solely by the synchronized plunge of oars into the water's surface, the resonant groan of the ship's wooden framework, and the omnipresent tang of saline air. Odysseus would consecrate these uneventful periods to practical tasks such as repairing sails or simply observing the intricate dance of sunlight upon the ocean's undulations, his thoughts gently oscillating between poignant recollections of his homeland and a serene acceptance of the immediate present. When the divine entities chose to intercede in the sphere of human existence, their actions were frequently characterized by a profound subtlety. One rarely witnessed ostentatious displays of dramatic thunderbolts or reverberating proclamations descending from the heavens. More commonly, their presence would manifest as an unassuming wayfarer encountered along a dusty thoroughfare, proffering counsel articulated in an entirely unremarkable tone. Alternatively, their influence might subtly steer the course of events through minor fortuitous occurrences, a misplaced coin that subtly diverts a hero onto an unforeseen byway, or an incidental encounter that irrevocably alters the trajectory of an individual's destiny. The ancient Hellenes possessed an inherent comprehension that the preponderance of life's experiences unfolds within these unassuming, gentle, and often unremarked upon instants. Their rich tapestry of myths faithfully mirrored this fundamental veracity. The truly spectacular incidents were akin to isolated luminous islets emerging from a boundless ocean of commonplace days, a continuum of habitual actions executed with meticulous diligence and mindful awareness. As the listener continued their process of relaxation, perhaps gently approaching the liminal state of slumber, they were invited to ponder the ancient Greek conceptualization of time itself. For the Hellenes, time was not a resource to be rigorously managed or optimized for maximum output, but rather an inexorable river, flowing onward at its inherent, unalterable velocity. They embraced its steady current, neither striving to resist its flow, nor attempting to construct barriers to hoard it for subsequent application. Their existence unfolded simply within its continuous embrace, characterized by a diligent attentiveness to the minutiae that collectively constitute a life richly experienced. The narrative then posed thought-provoking inquiries. What would the contemporary global landscape resemble if humanity adopted this unhurried Hellenic perspective? What insights might be gleaned if one dedicated moments to observing the shifting illumination upon their domestic surfaces, or the nuanced shifts in expression adorning a beloved's countenance during an ordinary dialogue? What profound revelations might emerge from the interstitial periods between our meticulously planned engagements? Perhaps a profound sagacity resides within this more deliberate methodology of narrative articulation, this readiness to linger within instants that do not necessarily propel the storyline forward, but instead profoundly enrich our comprehension of the terrestrial sphere and our intrinsic position within it. As the audience reposed, absorbing the unfolding narrative, they were, perhaps, experiencing a subtle glimpse into that venerable Greek ethos concerning time, perpetually present, deeply observant, and utterly unhurried. So, our forthcoming narrative will introduce us to an individual who deeply understood the merits of perseverance and meticulous attention to every minute particular. A master artisan whose dexterous hands fashioned marvels, yet whose most profound accomplishment might have resided in the tranquil instances he dedicated to instructing his offspring. Daedalus of Athens awaits our contemplation. His story is not one of flamboyant exploits, but rather of the subtle alchemy of creation that unfurls within the serene focus of dedicated labor. As we continue our measured exploration through the less boisterous annals of Greek mythology, let us now direct our focus to a personality whose appellation may resonate with familiarity, but whose quotidian existence largely remains an uncharted territory in contemporary renditions. Daedalus of Athens, predominantly commemorated for his spectacular failures and triumphant feats, the intricate labyrinth, the innovative wings crafted from wax and feathers, spent the preponderance of his days as nothing more than a fatigued artisan striving to navigate the demands of each passing 24 hours. Envision Daedalus rousing himself before the first hint of dawn, not with an abrupt, purposeful surge, but with the deliberate, somewhat reluctant, stirring characteristic of someone perpetually deprived of sufficient slumber. His Athenian workshop, a humble edifice, featured uneven flagstone floors, polished smooth in certain areas by countless years of restless pacing. The nascent morning light would penetrate through slender apertures, illuminating motes of dust performing a silent ballet in the air and casting a soft glow upon the sundry tools of his diverse vocations, which lay scattered about. Daedalus embodied what we might presently term a polymath or a Renaissance man, a gifted sculptor, an innovative architect, a visionary inventor, and a skilled engineer. However, the Hellenes of his era possessed no such elaborate classifications. To them, he was simply a chirurgos, a craftsman, a diligent maker of objects both aesthetically pleasing and eminently practical. His day would commence with the unadorned ritual of kindling a modest fire in a corner of his workspace, not for any theatrical display, but solely to warm a simple vessel of water for a tisane brewed from dried botanicals gathered from the verdant slopes beyond the city walls. As he patiently awaited the water's warming, he would meticulously trace his fingers over his implements, scrutinizing the keenness of a chisel's edge, lubricating the wooden haft of a mallet, arranging and reordering the sundry articles upon his workbench. These hushed preludes to his daily toil were never hurried. They were executed with the deliberate, almost meditative gestures of an individual who had performed these identical actions myriad times before. The populace of Athens recognized Daedalus not as a legendary persona, but as the weary individual frequently observed, ambling unhurriedly through the agora during the twilight hours, his hands indelibly stained with the telltale marks of clay, pigment, or wood dust. They would offer him greetings, to which he would respond with a taciturn nod, often too deeply immersed in contemplation of some intricate design conundrum or construction challenge to engage in protracted discourse. Daedalus harbored a nephew named Talos, occasionally referred to as Perdix in later chronicles, who served as his apprentice. The dynamic between them was devoid of dramatic mentorship or rousing inspirational addresses. Instead, it comprised primarily of comfortable, companionable silences, punctuated by sporadic, laconic directives. Kindly pass me that diminutive chisel. Observe closely how I effect the joining of these two components. You have rendered this corner excessively sharp. It necessitates a gentle rounding. On any given day, Daedalus might dedicate countless hours to painstakingly carving a wooden effigy of Athena destined for a local sanctuary. This occupation was far from glamorous. It entailed the painstaking, gradual removal of minuscule splinters of wood, the incessant verification and re-verification of proportions, and the occasional stepping back to appraise the evolving piece from an altered vantage point. His spine would ache from the prolonged stoop over his work, yet he seldom registered the discomfort until the day's conclusion, when he would finally straighten, feeling the insistent protest of his overtaxed musculature. The completion of such a statue would often necessitate weeks of sustained effort. There were no sudden, dramatic flashes of inspiration, no singular moment when the raw block of wood miraculously transmuted into a finished work of art. It was an arduous, incremental process of revelation, the divine figure slowly manifesting from the timber through patient, reiterative labor. Occasionally, Daedalus would toil for hours only to excise an amount of material that could scarcely be contained within the hollow of his hand. Midday would typically find him partaking of a frugal repast. A simple loaf of bread, some olives, perhaps a morsel of cheese, not within the opulent confines of a lavish banquet, but perched upon a stool within his workshop, his mind still grappling with the intricacies of how to render a wooden joint more robust, or how to achieve the precise curvature in a segment of marble. At times he would become so utterly engrossed in resolving a minor technical predicament that he would entirely neglect his meal, the food remaining untouched as his intellect became wholly absorbed. The ancient narratives recount that Daedalus was the progenitor of numerous indispensable implements. The saw, the axe, the gimlet, a rudimentary form of drill. Yet, these groundbreaking inventions did not spring forth from sudden epiphanies or bursts of unadulterated brilliance. Rather, they emerged from innumerable hours of profound frustration, from the relentless pursuit of solutions to specific dilemmas that arose organically from his daily practical endeavors. He might dedicate an entire afternoon to attempting to sever a piece of timber in a particular manner, encountering repeated failures until, at last, he subtly modified his methodology or his tool, thereby achieving the coveted outcome. His nephew, Talos, evinced considerable aptitude as a craftsman, displaying a promising talent for invention. One afternoon, while strolling along the shoreline, the young man discovered the skeletal jawbone of a serpent and was profoundly inspired to fashion a saw by replicating its serrated teeth in iron. When he presented his ingenious device to his uncle, Daedalus did not respond with immediate commendation or the dramatic jealousy that some mythical accounts suggest. Instead, he meticulously scrutinized the implement in silence, testing its keen edge with the pad of his thumb, trying it upon a piece of discarded wood, and then returned it with a subtle nod, which for him constituted the most profound expression of approval. The bond between Daedalus and Talos eventually deteriorated, not through a singular climactic rupture, but through a gradual accretion of minor discordances. As Talos's proficiency burgeoned, Daedalus found himself increasingly peering over his nephew's shoulder, offering corrections that were progressively superfluous. Their dialogues grew more abbreviated, their silences longer and considerably less congenial. The most widely circulated iteration of the myth posits that Daedalus, consumed by an overwhelming fit of envy, propelled Talos from the precipice of the Acropolis to his demise. However, it is conceivable that the truth was more subdued, more quotidian in its unfolding. Perhaps there was merely a profound disagreement, a heated exchange of acrimonious words within the confined space of the workshop, culminating in Talos's departure to establish his own enterprise as a direct competitor. The death in this context might have been a metaphorical one, signifying the irrevocable termination of a relationship rather than the cessation of a life. Following his nephew's exit, Daedalus's workshop became even more profoundly quiet. He would often converse with himself as he labored, a continuous internal monologue of technical observations and self-reminders. This joint requires greater tightness. Remember to allow this to dry thoroughly before applying the subsequent layer. The proportional balance is not quite right here. Casual visitors might detect the low murmur of his voice before catching sight of him, his utterances a soft, almost imperceptible sound, barely distinguishable from the rhythmic scrape of his tools against wood or stone. When King Minos of Crete formally solicited his professional expertise, Daedalus did not embark upon his journey with any accompanying fanfare or grand ceremony. He meticulously packed his essential tools, enveloping them in oiled cloth to preclude the onset of rust, exchanged quiet farewells with neighbors who had scarcely truly known him despite years of close proximity, and boarded a humble merchant vessel bound for Crete with the resigned air of an individual simply undertaking yet another professional engagement. The sea voyage itself unfolded without incident or drama. Daedalus spent the greater part of it seated upon the deck, observing the kaleidoscopic shifts in the sea's hues or attempting to snatch some sleep below, despite the ship's incessant pitching and rolling. He may have carved small wooden effigies to occupy his hands and quiet his mind, not aspiring to create masterpieces, but merely simple forms to maintain his dexterity and mental composure. Upon his arrival in Crete, he discovered King Minos to be an exceedingly demanding patron, the sort of monarch who possesses scant knowledge of the intricacies of craftsmanship, but harbors remarkably precise and unyielding expectations regarding his desired outcomes. The momentous commission for the labyrinth materialized only after Daedalus had successfully completed a series of lesser projects for the royal palace. Ingenious mechanical playthings for the sovereign's offspring, crucial enhancements to the palace's intricate water distribution system, and elaborate decorative elements for ceremonial chambers. The labyrinth itself, that architectural marvel of antiquity, was not conceived and constructed in a sudden surge of creative brilliance, but rather through many months of painstaking, methodical planning. Daedalus would dedicate entire days to performing complex calculations upon waxed tablets, meticulously erasing and recalculating them when the numerical values failed to align. He produced countless preliminary sketches and intricate small-scale models, rigorously testing diverse configurations of pathways and deceptive dead ends. The actual construction phase spanned several years, with Daedalus diligently overseeing teams of skilled laborers who meticulously laid stone upon stone in strict adherence to his precise specifications. He was not an imperious overlord, but a perpetually fatigued supervisor who frequently found himself reiterating the same fundamental concepts multiple times, occasionally compelled to rectify work that had been executed improperly, and who concluded each arduous day covered in a fine layer of stone dust, too utterly exhausted to perform more than a cursory ablution before succumbing to a dreamless sleep. Throughout this protracted period, Daedalus's son, Icarus, was progressively transitioning from childhood into young manhood. Their familial relationship was not characterized by a continuous stream of didactic moments or profound philosophical dialogues. On most days, they simply coexisted within the same physical spaces. Daedalus remained too deeply immersed in his demanding work to impart much in the way of paternal sagacity, while Icarus amused himself by observing the diligent laborers or engaging in play with the ingenious mechanical toys his father had crafted for the royal children. As you pause to contemplate this narrative, endeavor to visualize the labyrinth gradually manifesting, not in an instantaneous burst, but patiently, stone by painstaking stone. Imagine the quiet, profound satisfaction Daedalus might have experienced, not necessarily at its ultimate completion, but during those infrequent, precious instances when a particularly challenging section of the design coalesced precisely as he had originally envisioned it. These modest triumphs, rather than any grand, celebrated achievements, constituted the authentic recompense of his dedicated craft. When the labyrinth was at last finished, there was no elaborate ceremony, no official unveiling. Minos simply arrived to conduct his inspection, offered a laconic nod of approval, and promptly commenced formulating plans for its future deployment. These meticulously laid plans would ultimately precipitate Daedalus's incarceration, following his pivotal assistance to Theseus in navigating the intricate maze to confront and vanquish the formidable Minotaur. To vanquish the Minotaur. The legendary escape, employing wings fashioned from wax, transpired after a prolonged period of silent confinement. During this time, Daedalus reverted to the unpretentious labor of his hands, meticulously carving, constructing, and fashioning diminutive, exquisite objects. He engaged in these creative endeavors not with the expectation of achieving liberation, but rather because the act of creation was an intrinsic part of his very being. The wings themselves were painstakingly assembled over numerous weeks. Feathers were gathered discreetly, one or two at a time, to avoid arousing any suspicion, while wax was melted in small quantities over flickering candles during the clandestine hours of night. As one contemplates the figure of Daedalus, there's a profound sense of solace in envisioning this mythical persona not as an extraordinary inventor or a beleaguered, grief-stricken father, but rather as a weary artisan. His narrative serves as a potent reminder that the vast majority of human accomplishments, even those so remarkable as to transcend into legend, are forged through diligent, often laborious effort, rather than through sudden, dramatic flashes of brilliance. His hands, bearing the indelible marks of decades of toil, calloused and stained, reveal more about the essence of human ingenuity than any fantastical tale ever could. The quiet determination with which he confronted challenges, his systematic approach to his craft, and the gradual accretion of expertise over an entire lifetime are, in truth, the fundamental cornerstones of creation, a reality as pertinent in ancient Athens as it remains in the contemporary world. As one's thoughts gently drift with this serene recounting, perhaps a contemplation of the patient craftspeople encountered in one's own life, or the unheralded, persistent work that underpins so much of what humanity cherishes, might naturally arise. In the ensuing narrative, a different, often overlooked facet of ancient Greek existence will be explored: the transformative impact of a humble tree upon the destiny of an entire metropolis. This transformation occurred not through some mystical intervention, but through the consistent, gradual provision of sustenance, precious oil, and welcome shade. Let us therefore proceed on our unhurried exploration of Greek mythology by directing our attention to an entity that might, at first glance, appear rather commonplace: a tree. Yet, this is no ordinary arboreal specimen. It is the venerable olive tree, whose unassuming presence sculpted Athens in ways far more profound than many of the sensational conflicts or intricate political machinations that frequently occupy the pages of historical accounts. One is likely familiar with the celebrated myth. During the nascent period of Athens, the deities Athena and Poseidon vied for the esteemed patronage of the nascent city. Poseidon, in a display of his formidable power, struck the Acropolis with his trident, causing a spring of salt water to emerge. Athena, in contrast, gently touched the earth, and from that very spot sprang forth the inaugural olive tree. The populace, recognizing the superior utility of Athena's offering, selected her gift, and consequently, the city adopted her distinguished name. However, what the myth often neglects to elaborate upon, what such condensed narratives seldom afford the time to detail, is the gradual, subtle manner in which this remarkable tree reshaped the fortunes of a city over many centuries. This transformation was not a product of divine intervention, but rather the result of the patient, unwavering provision of its manifold bounties, its succulent fruit, its invaluable oil, its sturdy wood, and its comforting shade. Envision an early summer dawn in ancient Athens, long before the majestic Parthenon graced the summit of the Acropolis. The sun has just commenced its ascent, casting its first warming rays upon the eastern slopes of the surrounding hills. A farmer, his gait unhurried, traverses his olive groves, some trees planted by his own grandfather, others even more ancient. These are not the imposing, dramatic arboreal giants such as the oak or cypress. Instead, they stand at a modest stature, their trunks frequently gnarled and twisted, bearing the unmistakable hallmarks of profound age. Their leaves, a delicate silver-green hue, shimmer and dance with every gentle zephyr. The farmer progresses slowly, scrutinizing each tree with the meticulous attention of an individual whose very livelihood hinges upon discerning subtle alterations. He observes which trees are yielding a bountiful harvest this year, and which appear to be in a period of quiescence. He diligently inspects for any indications of disease or damage incurred during the winter tempest. There is no urgency to this methodical examination. Olive trees operate on a temporal scale distinctly different from that of humans, with some specimens enduring for hundreds, even thousands, of years. Nearby, his wife and daughter are diligently collecting fallen branches to fuel their cooking fire. Olive wood combusts slowly, emitting minimal smoke and a pleasant, distinctive fragrance. It represents one of the numerous, modest blessings bestowed by the tree, often overlooked in more grandiose historical narratives. As they engage in their task, they converse softly about everyday matters, a neighbor's newborn, forthcoming festival plans, and a bread recipe requiring a touch more refinement. Their voices harmoniously intermingle with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant calls of various birds. Within the city itself, the olive's pervasive influence is equally discernible, yet equally understated. In a humble dwelling situated near the agora, a woman awakens before her family to commence her daily preparations. She ignites a small clay lamp, fueled by olive oil. The flame, though diminutive, casts just sufficient illumination for her to navigate the room without disturbing the slumber of the others. This uncomplicated ritual, bringing light forth from darkness, recurs in thousands of Athenian households each morning and evening, an everyday marvel rendered possible by the unassuming olive. Later in the day, she will utilize olive oil for culinary purposes, for ministering to minor abrasions, and for moisturizing skin parched by the sun and wind. She will cleanse the family's woolen garments by treating stubborn stains with a concoction of olive oil blended with fuller's earth. These are not the heroic deeds that find their way into epic poetry or onto exquisitely painted pottery, but they constitute the quiet, essential backdrop against which all other facets of Athenian life gracefully unfold. In a workshop positioned near the city's periphery, an elderly potter is meticulously preparing to glaze his most recent creations. The clay vessels and amphorae, specifically designed for the storage of olive oil, stand in orderly rows, awaiting their final decorative touch. He is keenly aware that these containers will journey far beyond the confines of Athens, conveying not merely oil, but also the esteemed reputation of his city to distant ports. Egyptian merchants highly prize Attic oil for its unparalleled quality. Traders from the Black Sea eagerly exchange their grain for this precious golden liquid. Without the need for dramatic pronouncements or military expeditions, the humble olive seamlessly connects Athens to an expansive and intricate network of trade. The potter works methodically. His movements, though decelerated by the passage of time, remain precise, honed by decades of dedicated practice. As he applies the glaze, he softly hums a melody imparted to him by his grandfather, a working song commemorating the olive harvest, a tune more ancient than anyone can recall. The song features no dramatic climaxes or intricate harmonies, merely a gentle, repetitive melody that perfectly synchronizes with the rhythmic motions of hands harvesting fruit or feet pressing oil. Elsewhere in the bustling city, within a physician's residence, a man is afflicted by a persistent and troublesome cough. The physician, not a mythological dispenser of miracles, but a pragmatic healer possessing knowledge meticulously transmitted through generations, meticulously prepares a remedial concoction of olive oil infused with various herbs. He elucidates to his patient that the oil will effectively alleviate the irritation in the throat and serve as a carrier for the herb's therapeutic properties. This medical wisdom is neither dramatic nor magical. It represents the quiet, incremental accumulation of observations painstakingly gathered by countless healers over many centuries. As the midday hour approaches and the sun's intensity strengthens, individuals seek respite in the welcoming shade of olive trees, strategically planted throughout the urban landscape. Unlike the meticulously cultivated gardens of later historical periods, these trees fulfill practical functions, providing shade, fruit, and serving as natural demarcations between properties. Beneath one such tree, two venerable gentlemen are seated on a simple stone bench, engaged in a game of penny played on a board scratched directly into the ground. They have convened at this very spot for numerous years, their enduring camaraderie sustained through countless games played within the dappled light, filtering through the olive leaves. Their conversation meanders like a tranquil stream, touching upon the weather, various aches and pains, and the most recent decisions emanating from the assembly. They frequently pause, either contemplating their next move or simply savoring the comfortable silence that exists between individuals who no longer require a constant flow of words to communicate effectively. Around them, the city diligently pursues its daily affairs, merchants loudly proclaiming their wares, children at play, craftsmen engrossed in their work. Yet here, within the embrace of the olive's shade, time itself appears to decelerate. The profound economic significance of the olive to Athens becomes unequivocally evident when one considers the Panathenaic Games, an illustrious athletic and cultural festival celebrated every 4 years in homage to the goddess Athena. The coveted prizes awarded to the victorious athletes were amphorae brimming with olive oil. Not just any oil, but oil extracted from the sacred trees believed to be direct descendants of Athena's primordial gift. These particularly revered trees flourished in dedicated groves situated just outside the city, meticulously tended by officials specifically appointed for this vital purpose. Imagine the unwavering, quiet dedication of these caretakers, whose diligent efforts seldom garnered attention unless an unforeseen problem arose. Day after day, season after season, they meticulously pruned, provided irrigation during periods of drought, and vigilantly inspected for parasites, all to ensure the sustained health and vitality of the sacred trees. Their relationship with these trees was profoundly intimate, yet devoid of romantic idealization. They possessed an intricate understanding of each tree's specific requirements, noted its individual quirks and inherent tendencies, celebrated its years of abundant yield, and carefully nurtured it through leaner periods. The oil derived from these sacred trees possessed not merely symbolic value, it represented substantial material wealth. A victorious athlete might receive an amphora containing oil whose market value was equivalent to several years' wages for an average laborer. This prize was neither ostentatious nor dramatic. There were no golden laurel wreaths or gleaming armor, but its practical utility was immeasurable. Winners had the option to sell the oil, utilize it for their own household consumption, or barter it for other desirable commodities. The pervasive influence of the olive extended beyond mere economics, permeating the very fabric of Athenian law and social structure. The penalty for causing damage to an olive tree, particularly a sacred one, was exceedingly severe, potentially even culminating in death during the earliest historical periods. This harshness was not indicative of an unusually cruel Athenian populace, but rather a profound recognition of how utterly crucial these slow-growing trees were to their collective prosperity and enduring welfare, were intrinsic to their collective well-being and prosperity. Athenian identity itself was occasionally articulated through the evocative metaphor of the olive tree. Just as a transplanted olive tree would inherently preserve its fundamental essence, an Athenian citizen, even when residing in a foreign land, invariably retained their Athenian character. Similarly, mirroring the olive's protracted maturation period before yielding fruit, the cultivation and development of a citizen demanded both enduring patience and meticulous nurturing. Perhaps the most profound influence the olive exerted upon Athens manifested through its consistent provision of dependable abundance. In stark contrast to grain, which could suffer complete devastation during a year of drought, olive trees consistently produced, if not always in profusion, then at least with reliable regularity. This inherent dependability established a crucial safeguard against widespread famine, thereby fostering the emergence of a society sufficiently stable to embark upon intellectual pursuits such as philosophy, dramatic arts, and the intricate mechanisms of democratic governance. One might contemplate the vastly different trajectory Athens could have taken without this ubiquitous, unwavering presence. Lacking olive oil for illumination, the vibrant intellectual discourse would have been rigidly confined to the hours of daylight. Without the lucrative exports of olive products, the substantial wealth that underpinned magnificent public edifices and celebrated festivals might never have materialized. Furthermore, divested of the tranquil shade offered by olive groves, the characteristic open-air philosophical debates that defined Athenian intellectual life might have assumed an entirely altered form. As the imagined day gradually yields to evening, families across the city converge around their tables for the principal repast. Small, gleaming bowls of olive oil adorn these surfaces, poised for the communal act of dipping bread. The oil, sourced from disparate groves, possesses subtly distinct flavor profiles, some exhibiting a piquant zest, others a velvety smoothness, and still others a delicate hint of verdant grassiness. Nuances keenly appreciated by Athenians, yet seldom acknowledged within the grander narratives of historical accounts. Following the evening meal, as the cloak of darkness descends, the very same oil lamps that heralded the day's commencement are rekindled. In their soft, ambient glow, parents recount tales to their progeny. Skilled artisans meticulously continue their intricate crafts. Scribes diligently record commercial transactions or painstakingly transcribe philosophical treatises. The enduring dramas we revere from ancient Athens, the celebrated works of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, were both conceived and frequently perused under this same unassuming illumination. Thus, the day concludes precisely as it began, with the olive's unobtrusive beneficence enabling the very fabric of urban existence. No dramatic thunderbolts or fearsome sea monsters, no epic heroic odysseys or tragic downfalls, merely the steadfast, unwavering presence of a tree that generously bestows fruit, oil, timber, and shade, demanding minimal recompense in return. As one settles into repose and perhaps drifts toward slumber, it is pertinent to reflect upon how frequently history's monumental accomplishments are predicated upon such unassuming foundations. The indelible moments we recall, the tumultuous battles, the eloquent political orations, the transcendent artistic masterpieces were rendered feasible by an immeasurable multitude of quiet, unremarkable acts of cultivation and dedicated stewardship, meticulously reiterated day after day across successive generations. In the forthcoming narrative, we shall delve into another oft-overlooked facet of ancient Greek society: the women of Delphi, whose subtly whispered pronouncements influenced the momentous decisions of both monarchs and commoners, not through arcane supernatural powers, but through astute observation and a profound comprehension of human nature. The serene olive groves we have just traversed now recede, giving way to an altered topography, a precipitous mountain pathway ascending towards Delphi, the sacred precinct of Apollo, and the domicile of the ancient world's most renowned oracle. However, this particular evening, our focus will not rest upon the dramatic prophecies or the magnificent temple adorned with its resplendent statue of Apollo. Instead, our attention will pivot to the women whose quiet diligence rendered the oracle's operations possible, not solely the Pythia herself, but the myriad others whose names have regrettably been effaced by the annals of history. Envision a crisp spring morning at Delphi. The sun has not yet ascended above the formidable Mount Parnassus, and the sacred sanctuary remains enveloped in a profound azure shadow. The majority of visitors still slumber within the guest houses of the town nestled below, yet the women dedicated to serving the temple have been awake for countless hours. They navigate the sacred precinct with hushed movements, meticulously preparing for the impending day with the unhurried efficiency characteristic of those who have executed these identical tasks countless times before. Among this diligent cadre is Cleobia, an elderly woman who has resided at Delphi for over 3 decades. Her journey commenced as a youthful attendant, and she now supervises the domestic intricacies of the sanctuary. While she is not the Pythia, the celebrated priestess who articulates Apollo's divine oracles, her contribution is undeniably no less indispensable. This morning, like every preceding morning, she meticulously verifies that fresh water has been procured from the revered Castalian spring for the requisite purification rites, that the temple floors have been impeccably swept, and that the perpetual flame within Apollo's inner sanctum continues its unwavering burn. Cleobia's hands bear the indelible marks of decades of labor, not the heroic, dramatic exertions of legendary figures, but the steady, reiterative chores that meticulously preserve sacred spaces. Her fingers, subtly curved with the nascent onset of arthritis, delicately adjust the intricate folds of a ceremonial cloth, gently smooth a crease from an altar covering, and precisely pinch the wick of an oil lamp to ensure a more consistent flame. Each movement is deliberate, executed with a quiet attentiveness that, in itself, constitutes a form of devout worship. In close proximity, a younger woman named Theodora diligently grinds barley for the sacrificial cakes destined as offerings to Apollo. The diminutive handmill emits a soft, rhythmic cadence, stone against stone, the grain gradually undergoing its transformation into fine flour. She proceeds without haste. The intrinsic quality of the offering holds paramount importance, and any undue swiftness would be deemed disrespectful to both the grain itself and the divine entity who will receive it. As she toils, she softly hums, not a formal hymn, but a working melody passed down through generations, learned from the woman who instructed her in this very task years prior. These dedicated women are by no means isolated from the broader world. Despite their residence within the sanctuary, they are privy to a constant stream of information. Confidences whispered by visitors seeking profound guidance, political deliberations among delegates representing diverse city-states, and merchants exchanging vital news from distant ports. They assimilate this information not with the calculated scrutiny of covert agents, but with the innate awareness of individuals whose work renders them simultaneously conspicuous and yet frequently overlooked. When monarchs and military commanders arrive to consult the esteemed oracle, their perception is often limited to the priestess, the male priests, and the imposing architectural grandeur. Rarely do they discern the woman who meticulously poured their purification water, or who swept the very path upon which they trod. Yet these very same unnoticed women frequently possess the most perspicacious understanding of the true operational dynamics at Delphi, an understanding meticulously accumulated through years of silent observation. By mid-morning, a steady stream of visitors begins to arrive at the sanctuary. Today, a delegation from Corinth is present, comprising affluent merchants seeking sagacious counsel regarding a proposed new trade route. They bear impressive votive offerings: a gleaming bronze tripod, several amphorae containing exquisite oil, and a small, securely fastened chest that, in all likelihood, contains gold. They are formally received by the temple's official representatives, men clad in ceremonial robes who accept the lavish gifts with appropriate solemnity. Standing discreetly behind these men are several temple attendants, among whom is a woman named Philomena, who has served at Delphi for nearly 2 decades. Her official capacity is modest. She assists with the preparatory rituals for the Pythia's trance state and aids in maintaining the temple's inventories. However, her comprehension of the oracle's intricate functioning transcends what most observers realize. Philomena meticulously registers every detail concerning the Corinthian delegation, the quality of their garments, the manner in which they converse among themselves when they believe they are unobserved, and the subtle undercurrents of tension between them, hinting at unresolved disagreements pertaining to the very venture they have journeyed to inquire about. She requires no divine inspiration to interpret these telling signs. Merely decades of observing similar groups arrive and depart, their eventual fates subsequently recounted by later visitors. As the day progresses, Philomena and the other women steadfastly continue their duties throughout the sanctuary. They replenish oil and lamps, meticulously arrange offerings on smaller altars, and prepare meals for the esteemed priests and priestesses. Their movements seamlessly align with the sun's trajectory across the heavens, unhurried yet executed with precise timing. The oracle operates exclusively on designated days of the month, and consequently, every detail must be impeccably prepared for those pivotal occasions. The current Pythia bears the name Aristone, a woman hailing from a respectable family who arrived at Delphi in her 30s after experiencing widowhood. Now in her 50s, she has served as Apollo's venerable voice for nearly 15 years. The popular perception of the Pythia often conjures an image of a youthful woman propelled into wild ecstasy, yet the historical reality was typically quite different. Most were mature women, carefully selected for their inherent dignity and exemplary character. On non-oracle days, such as this particular one, Aristone actively participates in the daily rhythms of the sanctuary. This afternoon finds her seated in a small, secluded garden with several of the temple attendants, including younger women who are diligently acquiring the complex traditions of Delphi. They are engaged in the timeless task of spinning wool, an activity universally common to women across Greece, from queens to enslaved individuals, while Aristone imparts her profound knowledge of the sanctuary's rich history. Her voice is low and measured as she recounts the evolutionary trajectory of specific rituals, elucidates the proper handling of particular offerings, and instructs on how to discern signs that might indicate Apollo's displeasure. This is not dramatic, mystical training, but rather practical instruction, delivered with the patient wisdom of someone who profoundly understands that the preservation of tradition necessitates meticulous attention to a myriad of small, intricate details. Her singular focus extended to countless small details. Among the attentive audience was a maiden of perhaps 14 summers named Timandra, who had arrived in Delphi as an orphan and subsequently spent her formative years in the diligent service of the sacred precinct. She absorbed every utterance with profound concentration, occasionally interjecting with queries that distinctly evinced an unusually incisive intellect. The elder women exchanged knowing glances. They had been observing Timandra for a considerable duration, noting her meticulous observance of ritualistic minutiae and her innate comprehension of visitors' multifaceted requirements. It was their burgeoning conviction that she might one day possess the requisite disposition to serve the deity directly as a Pythia. As twilight began its gentle descent, the sanctuary assumed a distinctively altered ambiance. The day's transient visitors commenced their return to the lower settlement, leaving behind a serene environment where the resident women and men could attend to their personal pursuits and responsibilities. Within a modest edifice situated near the temple's culinary domain, several of the older attendants convened to partake in a simple repast and to deliberate upon the day's observations. Their discourse was far from idle chatter or inconsequential rumor. Rather, it constituted a deliberate and thoughtful exchange of vital information designed to enhance their service to the sacred site. They meticulously discussed which supplicants appeared genuinely devout and which merely performed the ritualistic motions perfunctorily, which specific offerings might necessitate particular care, and which geopolitical undercurrents might conceivably impact future consultations with the oracle. Cleobia recounted that the dignitary leading the Corinthian delegation appeared manifestly perturbed, frequently fidgeting with his attire and projecting his voice excessively. He posed numerous inquiries concerning antecedent prophetic pronouncements related to trade, she noted, methodically breaking off a piece of bread. I presented him with the requested inscriptions, yet he seemed frustrated by their lack of definitive clarity. Philomena affirmed this with a nod. I inadvertently listened to a heated discussion he was having with the youngest member of their entourage. Apparently, they have already allocated substantial capital to this specific venture. They are not so much soliciting genuine counsel as they are seeking sacred endorsement for a decision already irrevocably made. This crucial observation would assuredly be relayed to Aristone, the Pythia, prior to the subsequent oracle day. It would not arrive as a direct instruction, but rather as elucidating background context designed to assist her in discerning the subterranean query veiled beneath the official inquiry. The Pythia's revered equivocal pronouncements were far from random. Instead, they evinced a profound grasp of the human condition and the intricate impetuses that compelled individuals to seek divine guidance. As night fully enveloped the sacred grounds, luminescent oil burners were kindled throughout the sanctuary. In her personal quarters, Aristone sat in solitary contemplation, perusing archived chronicles of previous oracular responses pertinent to commerce and nautical enterprises. This diligent preparation was not undertaken with the conscious intent of employing this information when seated upon the tripod above the mysterious chasm. She genuinely experienced a transcendental condition that she ascribed to the divine manifestation of Apollo, but rather from her steadfast belief that cultivating her mental faculties in this manner constituted a profound gesture of veneration to both the god and those who sought his profound wisdom. Meanwhile, in an unadorned sleeping quarters, the younger attendants commenced their preparations for slumber. Timandra occupied her humble mat, diligently repairing a rent in her woolen himation by the flickering illumination of a small lamp. Around her, other girls and women settled into their nocturnal routines, tending to their tresses, engaging in hushed dialogues, and uttering unpretentious invocations to various deities for serene visions or the alleviation of trivial afflictions. These were the women of Delphi, not enigmatic diviners adorned in opulent vestments, as subsequent artistic renditions would portray them, but unassuming individuals engaged in the intricate labor of preserving a sacred precinct and functioning as conduits between mortals and gods. Their influence stemmed less from supernatural enthrallment and more from their strategic vantage point at the confluence of intelligence, established customs, and the intricacies of the human psyche. They discerned the essential truths clients required to apprehend, rather than simply the desired affirmations. And they perceived that the intrinsic worth occasionally resided beyond the explicit pronouncement of a prophecy, residing instead in the very act of soliciting counsel, of expressing apprehensions and aspirations within a hallowed precinct, removed from quotidian anxieties. As one rests and listens to this unhurried narration, perhaps one is prompted to contemplate the sagacity of these unsung figures, their unwavering meticulousness, their profound comprehension of the human condition, and their recognition that authentic enlightenment frequently stems not from theatrical disclosure, but from diligent scrutiny and judicious deciphering of discernible regularities, visible only to those who take the necessary time to truly perceive. In our forthcoming narrative, we shall redirect our focus to another unheralded collective, the immortal retainers who sustained quotidian existence on Mount Olympus. This exploration will demonstrate that even the gods themselves were unable to achieve self-sufficiency and sustenance, and that the paramount celestial authorities still depended upon the unassuming, indispensable efforts of keeping a divine household operating seamlessly. As we continue our unhurried exploration through the unexamined facets of Greek mythology, let us turn our thoughts toward Mount Olympus. Our focus will not be on the august council chamber, where gods made cosmic decrees, but rather on the serene corridors, culinary domains, and verdant grounds where myriads of deathless retainers diligently sustained the celestial domicile. For even within the realm of myth, eminence demands bolstering, and authority necessitates diligent upkeep. Imagine the first rays of dawn illuminating the oriental gradients of Olympus. While the major gods might still be asleep in their splendid private quarters, the majestic mountain is already stirring with hushed industry. Ageless retainers, sylvan spirits, lesser divinities, and entities inhabiting the liminal realms betwixt god and mortal move through corridors of lustrous marble and burnished aurum, making ready for an unending span of existence. Among them is Aglaia, a juvenile nymph, whose foremost charge involves ministering to Zeus's personal chambers. She moves with the meticulous exactitude of someone who has learned precisely how the sovereign of deities desires his environment. The colossal sleeping platform, adorned with ethereal cloud-spun linens, must be arranged just so, not excessively orderly. Zeus enjoys a certain agreeable informality, yet not truly a state of disorder. Her nimble hands eradicate imperceptible creases from plush pillows, calibrate draperies to admit the precise measure of illumination, and assiduously cleanse the amassed array of offerings and homage that Zeus has accumulated across aeons. Each item possesses a unique provenance that Aglaia recites from memory. Though Zeus himself has long lost recollection of numerous origins, she regards even the most diminutive artifact with profound veneration, not out of fear but from an understanding that immortality signifies a perpetual accrual of significant artifacts. Elsewhere on the mountain, within culinary domains capacious enough to concoct feasts for the entire pantheon, a venerable divinity known as Euphrosyne supervises the intricate preparation of ambrosia and nectar. Though often described simply as the food of the gods, ambrosia is not a singular dish, but rather an intricate gastronomic repertoire with diverse adaptations to cater to varied celestial tastes. Euphrosyne has been creating these divine meals since before the genesis of numerous contemporary Olympians. Her movements are deliberate yet impeccably efficacious, each gesture honed through countless epochs of application. Under her sagacious direction, scores of minor, deathless beings work at various tasks, procuring exotic components from across the world, preparing constituents requiring decades of maturation before utilization, and managing perpetual infernos that must never be allowed to extinguish. The kitchen operates in an agreeable, hushed ambiance, with only occasional soft instructions or questions breaking the serene cadence of labor. These immortals have been performing the same tasks together for centuries. They foresee one another's requirements with the fluidity of dancers who have long since memorized their choreography. Euphrosyne tastes a concoction that has undergone slow evaporation for multiple mortal epochs, contemplates it judiciously, then adds a solitary bead of ambrosial liquid from a small vial secured at her waist. The nuance of the modification would be utterly imperceptible to mortal senses, yet it delineates the chasm between celestial flawlessness and mere excellence. Beyond the main citadel, within the renowned verdant grounds of Olympus, a satyr named Philoxenus cultivates unique flora unparalleled across all existence. Some specimens unfurl blossoms whose hues shift in concert with the sentiments of those who view them. Others yield berries that bestow particular felicitous visions when placed beneath a pillow. A select few, secluded within an exclusive enclosure shielded by translucent barriers, are perilous, aesthetically captivating, and indispensable for specific celestial panaceas or metamorphoses. Philoxenus is devoid of the untamed disposition typically linked to his species. Centuries of caring for divine botanical specimens have rendered him systematic, forbearing, and exquisitely observant of myriad alterations in substratum and illumination. He murmurs gently to the plants as he works, not from any belief that they comprehend his words, but because after such an extended tenure in their presence, taciturnity seems rather discourteous. His assistant today is a juvenile naiad designated Cleo, recently transferred to the horticultural domain subsequent to decades of service in the ablutionary suites. She watches carefully as Philoxenus demonstrates how to trim a notably capricious creeper that bears the fruit for a vintage consecrated solely for celestial nuptials. The incision must be executed with exactitude, concurrent with the vine's inner luminescence throbbing azure verdant, a synchronization demanding both vigilance and endurance. "No rush," Philoxenus tells her, his voice as gentle as the breeze moving through the garden. "It has been growing for 700 years. It can certainly wait another few minutes for the perfect moment." As midday draws near, the rhythm of exertion intensifies across Olympus. The principal deities will soon commence their day, each adhering to their distinctive routines and specific needs. Within Athena's sacred chambers, a small assembly of owls, not mere avian creatures, but lesser divine beings who have assumed this particular guise, diligently arrange scrolls and various writing implements according to the goddess's exacting schema of arrangement. They labor with the scrupulous diligence of dedicated archivists, ensuring that every single text occupies the precise location where Athena will anticipate its presence upon embarking on her day's intellectual pursuits. Concurrently, in Aphrodite's sumptuous apartment, an assemblage of attendant graces meticulously prepare for the goddess's awakening. They carefully position her cosmetics and exquisite jewelry, warm-scented aromatic unguents for her forthcoming bath, and thoughtfully select various clothing options, guided by their intimate knowledge of her contemporary inclinations and scheduled engagements. Their intricate work demands not only an acute attention to physical objects, but also a profound awareness of subtle emotional tides. Discerning which colors might best complement Aphrodite's mood on a given day, or which fragrances might harmonize with, rather than overshadow, her inherent divine scent. Even Ares, the formidable god of war, depends upon the unobtrusive assistance of his dedicated servants. Within his vast weapons repository, two brothers, celestial offspring of an alliance between a minor river god and a mountain nymph, assiduously burnish and furbish his extensive arsenal of martial implements and protective plating. They execute their tasks in harmonious taciturnity, their hands possessing an innate understanding of the proper handling for each distinct material. The lustrous bronze, the unyielding iron, the pliant leather, and various arcane substances beyond human nomenclature. The elder sibling, Astos, has been curating Ares's formidable gear for such an extended period that he can discern minute asymmetries undetectable to anyone else. He executes subtle calibrations to a spear's equilibrium of mass, applies particular unguents to keep leather pliant but robust, and assesses the keenness of a sword's edge against his own immortal skin, not with sufficient force to inflict injury, but merely enough to confirm its cutting efficacy. Throughout the celestial palace, analogous tableaux materialize. Hermes's swift messengers categorize dispatches from the far reaches of the celestial sphere. Poseidon's retinue meticulously ready his aquatic conveyance, paying exacting scrutiny upon the intricate engineering that allows it to transform flawlessly between the watery depths and solid ground. Demeter's devoted helpers gather specimens of each novel botanical species nurtured by mortal hands for her divine scrutiny and possible benediction. By the nascent hours of the afternoon, the principal deities have commenced their daily engagements. Some linger within the celestial citadel for deliberative assemblies or private endeavors. Others journey to their designated realms or embark upon engagements within the human sphere. Regardless of their chosen paths, the arduous work of upholding the fabric of divine life continues with unceasing diligence. In an expansive chamber with a vaulted firmament appearing to merge with the ethereal mists themselves, an assemblage of melodious muses, not the celebrated nine associated with arts and sciences, but their many sisters of subordinate fame, rehearse the melodic compositions that will grace the nocturnal repast. Their diverse instruments include some recognizable to mortal perception, and others capable of engendering sonorous expressions unattainable in the terrestrial sphere. Their sagacious leader, Polythea, has been fashioning auditory tapestries for celestial events since prior to the articulation of human language. She possesses a profound comprehension of the intricate symphonies that gratify divine sensibilities and the nuanced modulations capable of swaying deific temperaments. Today, she is crafting a novel orchestration specifically designed to alleviate discord between Apollo and Artemis, who had experienced a trifling contention during yesterday's hunt. As the muses practice their harmonies, attendants meticulously outfit the banqueting chamber. Tables and couches are configured in deference to the prevailing celestial stratification and interpersonal dynamics, a configuration that undergoes nuanced alteration over time as pacts realign and divine esteem waxes and wanes. The precise positioning constitutes an intricate choreographic diplomacy in itself, guaranteeing that adversaries are not placed in proximate proximity while simultaneously revering the preeminence of every divinity. The celestial overseer responsible for this delicate arrangement is Eunomia, who has orchestrated the intricacies of sacred banquets since the epoch of Titan supremacy. He operates from an encyclopedic recall, his memory continually refined through frequent discreet consultations with those who serve the deities intimately, and might be cognizant of nascent shifts in interdivine rapport. Each individual's station is customized with meticulous care. Poseidon's chalice is perpetually replenished with water from a particular subterranean fount. Artemis is provided with bolsters imbued with sylvan botanicals evoking her woodland domains, and Zeus is situated to command a panoramic vista of the assembly, yet himself retaining a discreet eminence. As dusk draws nigh, the rhythm of readiness intensifies. The culinary chambers dispatch the initial viands. Servers assume their stations according to time-honored ceremonial directives. Nectar purveyors concoct bespoke vintages meticulously tailored for each deific gustatory preference. When the deities at last convene, they enter a space so impeccably appointed that they seldom perceive the painstaking exertion involved, which is precisely the ultimate objective. The nocturnal banquet commences with a semblance of unburdened grace that, in reality, requires the most meticulous forethought and flawless implementation. As gods deliberate upon universal affairs or participate in deathless diversions, hundreds of servants foresee requirements, preempt nascent complications before they develop, and ceaselessly sustain the ambiance of consummate ease that celestial beings have grown accustomed to. And subsequent to the banquet, when gods withdraw to their private sanctums or embark upon nocturnal pursuits, a fresh contingent of deathless laborers initiates the cycle of renewal. The dining hall is reinstated to impeccable arrangement. Marred articles for celestial passions occasionally ignite, are mended or substituted. Arrangements commence for the ensuing day's provisions. In Zeus's chambers, Aglaia reappears to prepare the ethereal bed linens and execute ultimate refinements to the chamber's atmosphere. She places a particular soporific bloom from Philoxenus's verdant cultivated plot in a small vase near the bed, modifies the perpetual luminescence to emanate an ideal degree of illumination, and ensures that an anthology of the day's most salient human supplications is placed on a small table where Zeus will perceive it upon reawakening. Her work, like that of all Olympus's servants, occupies the liminal realm between exigency and artistry. The gods could theoretically manage their personal environments and fashion their own sustenance. But the flawlessness they have grown to anticipate, the uninterrupted manifestation of deific existence itself, rests upon innumerable meticulous gestures of solicitude and devotion performed by those whose identities seldom grace the annals of legend. As the nocturnal shroud completely envelops the celestial peak, even many of the immortal attendants repose. Some gather in their humble abodes to recount their daily occurrences, or simply savor their mutual companionship. Others pursue individual passions, perhaps tending to a garden of their own, or engaging in the creation of verse destined to remain unknown to human audition. A select few, like Euphrosyne in her kitchen, persevere in their labors during the tranquil periods, crafting components necessitating specific nocturnal environments, or merely reveling in the serenity of the slumbering citadel. As you recline and attend to this serene narration, perhaps you are prompted to contemplate the unsung facilitators in your own world, those whose unassuming efforts establish the prerequisites for others' more conspicuous accomplishments. Or perhaps you merely value this reaffirmation that even in the domain of legend, preeminence seldom manifests independently. In our subsequent narrative, we shall investigate the rationale behind why the martial polis of Sparta elected to forego defensive ramparts, and how this seeming susceptibility became a fountainhead of both safeguarding and self-esteem for one of Hellas's most celebrated authorities. Let us continue our leisurely expedition through ancient Greece by turning our attention to one of its most renowned polis, Sparta. While most Greek cities fortified their perimeters with formidable lithic ramparts, Athens linked to its maritime gateway by the celebrated Long Walls, Thebes encircled by colossal bulwarks, Mycenae encompassed by edifices of such grandeur they were attributed to the Cyclopean race. Sparta persisted in its notable lack of circumvallation for the greater span of its existence. This wasn't because the Spartans were deficient in either the means or the expertise to construct defensive structures. It was an intentional decision, one that reflected their distinctive philosophy of defense and their profound apprehension of genuine power's essence. As the Spartan king Agesilaus II allegedly articulated when queried about the non-existence of protective barriers, "These are the walls of Sparta," indicating his populace attired in their unadorned crimson mantles. But instead of dwelling upon the theatrical dimensions of Lacedaemonian martial might that captivate the collective consciousness, let us investigate the more understated quotidian existence within an unfortified polis. The nuanced mental ramifications, the pragmatic adjustments, and the societal frameworks that rendered this unconventional decision both feasible and enduring. Imagine a hazy dawn in the Eurotas Valley, the geomorphological cradle of Sparta. The solar orb has yet to pierce through the ephemeral nebulae frequently congealing during nocturnal hours within this fluvial depression. A Lacedaemonian matron, Cleometis by appellation, awakens with the dawn, as is her daily custom, and emerges from her unpretentious dwelling. Contrasting with their counterparts in fortified metropolises, who might need to traverse a certain expanse ere encountering an egress point to depart into the countryside, Cleometis can gaze unhindered from her threshold across an unencumbered vista towards the encircling eminences. This unmediated rapport with the natural topography molds her perception of habitation in ways distinct from the experiences of Athenian or Theban females. There is no discernible demarcation where urbanity ceases and rusticity commences. No abrupt metamorphosis between metropolitan and agrarian zones. Instead, Sparta seamlessly integrates with its environmental context, dwellings progressively dispersing towards the periphery, ultimately yielding to the agricultural expanses and oleaginous plantations sustaining the populace that support the population. Cleometis commenced her daily rituals, drawing vital water from the communal well situated within the neighborhood for all domestic requirements. As she skillfully operated the rope and pulley apparatus, she exchanged hushed salutations with her neighbors, each engaged in analogous chores. Their discourse remained pragmatic, concentrating on the immediate necessities of the day and minor observations concerning atmospheric conditions or local occurrences. There was no idle chatter regarding the arrival of foreign merchants through non-existent city gates, primarily because such commercial visitors were generally discouraged from entering Sparta. This circumstance represented one of the less conspicuous ramifications of residing in an unwalled metropolis. Sparta maintained an extraordinary degree of cultural insularity when juxtaposed with other Greek polities. Without the inherent checkpoint afforded by city gates, regulating ingress into one's community became considerably more challenging, unless alternative mechanisms were devised to manage access. The Spartans ingeniously addressed this predicament through stringent regulations governing foreigners and a societal framework wherein outsiders were instantly discernible. Upon Cleomatis's return home with her precious water, she encountered a Spartan citizen named Charillus, who was performing his customary morning calisthenics in the interstitial space between residential structures, in stark contrast to the inhabitants of fortified cities, who frequently exercised within designated gymnasia or specialized training grounds. Spartans seamlessly integrated physical conditioning into every facet of their surroundings. Lacking a distinct demarcation between public and private domains, between urban and non-urban landscapes, daily activities permeated the environment in a manner that would have appeared peculiar to other Hellenes. By the mid-morning hours, the pervasive mist had dissipated, unveiling the majestic mountains that formed a natural encirclement around the Eurotas Valley. These formidable geological formations, rather than man-made ramparts, constituted Sparta's primary line of defense. The city's strategic placement was meticulously selected, featuring limited, readily accessible passes that could be safeguarded by relatively modest military detachments. Geography thus bestowed a protective advantage that other urban centers were compelled to construct for themselves. Near the nucleus of the settlement, a contingent of 7-year-old boys commenced their daily regimen within the agoge, the renowned Spartan pedagogical system that extracted young males from their familial abodes and integrated them into communal living arrangements, singularly focused on martial preparation. An seasoned instructor named Durkidas observed them with folded arms, his countenance impassive as they executed fundamental drills. Durkidas had rendered service to Sparta in both formal military campaigns and as an integral component of the less publicized, yet equally crucial, border patrol apparatus. Given Sparta's lack of fortifications, it relied upon unceasing vigilance along its extensive frontiers. Rotating cohorts of citizens perpetually maintained watches at pivotal mountain passes and along frequently utilized thoroughfares leading into Laconia, the expansive region encompassing Sparta. This particular obligation was not perceived as extraordinary or onerous. It was merely an intrinsic element of the Spartan rhythm of life. A citizen might dedicate several weeks annually to an outpost, embracing a Spartan existence, scrutinizing approaching travelers from a distance, and interrogating those who sought entry into Spartan territory. This ingenious system effectively created an intangible barrier, one composed of alert human attentiveness, rather than unyielding stone. As the midday hour approached, Cleomatis joined several other women to meticulously inspect a shared vegetable patch situated at what, in other cities, would be considered beyond the conventional urban perimeter. The women toiled assiduously, scrutinizing plants for indications of disease or pest infestation, harvesting ripe produce, and deliberating on subsequent plantings. Their discourse transitioned to recent intelligence regarding Athenian naval movements, information conveyed by a messenger on the preceding day. This scenario highlighted another repercussion of Sparta's unwalled status. Information disseminated differently here than in cities possessing clear points of entry. Devoid of gates, where news naturally converged as travelers arrived, Sparta cultivated a more decentralized intelligence framework. Multiple minor outposts gathered and relayed vital information. Citizens undertaking official journeys returned with pertinent observations. The restricted number of sanctioned foreign visitors underwent thorough debriefings. The outcome was that news tended to permeate Spartan society more gradually and uniformly than in cities where it might initially concentrate among those proximate to the gates or harbor. By the time Cleomatis and her companions discussed the Athenian naval movements, the majority of adults in Sparta were already apprised of this intelligence, having acquired it through overlapping communication networks. Following their tending of the garden, Cleomatis proceeded towards the area where young girls were engaged in their own rigorous physical conditioning. In contrast to other Greek city-states where female education and athletics were either circumscribed or entirely absent, Sparta actively promoted physical development for both girls and boys, albeit with distinct emphases and structural frameworks. Without walls delineating a clear urban boundary, these training zones existed within the interstices between residential clusters, rather than in formally designated facilities. As she observed her daughter participating in a wrestling exercise, Cleomatis exchanged insights with another mother. Neither woman expressed any apprehension regarding their daughter's engagement in activities that would undoubtedly scandalize Athenians. The Spartan perspective on gender roles, much like their approach to municipal boundaries, was less rigid than elsewhere in Greece, stemming not from a progressive ideology, but from a pragmatic recognition that robust women produced resilient offspring and could capably defend homesteads during the men's absences. The fundamental absence of fortifications influenced Spartan psychology in subtle yet profound ways. Citizens cultivated a distinct relationship with the concept of security, one predicated on human preparedness rather than static physical barriers. The perpetual visual affirmation that no stone edifice separated them from potential adversaries fostered a community-wide vigilance and an intricate web of interdependence that walls might have inadvertently diminished. This intrinsic characteristic manifested in daily customs that would appear peculiar to the inhabitants of walled cities. Spartans rarely accumulated conspicuous wealth or opulent possessions, partly due to their celebrated austerity, but also because overt affluence in an unwalled city would represent both a temptation to external raiders and a greater challenge to safeguard. They developed architectural styles that prioritized functionality over ostentation, with dwellings meticulously designed to function as defensible individual units, rather than relying on a citywide protective infrastructure. As the afternoon gracefully transitioned into evening, Charillus returned from his regular military obligations and rejoined Cleomatis at their humble abode. Their evening repast was unpretentious: humble barley bread, artisanal cheese, plump olives, and a modest quantity of wine diluted with water. The famed black broth, concocted from pork, blood, and vinegar, might grace more ceremonial occasions, but everyday meals were singularly focused on sustenance rather than Epicurean delight, another facet of the pragmatic Spartan ethos. After the meal, as twilight softened the contours of the landscape, Charillus walked to the crest of a nearby hill with their 10-year-old son. This evening ritual, involving the observation of approaches to the city as darkness descended, was not a formal assignment, but rather a habit many Spartan parents assiduously cultivated in their progeny. They stood in comfortable silence, the father occasionally indicating salient features in the terrain. That narrow chasm between those distant hills is the route from Tegea. Observe how the shadows meander across that expansive field. Anyone traversing it would be discernible by their disruption of the established pattern. This unique education in environmental cognizance represented another adaptation to a life devoid of city walls. Spartan children matured with an innate comprehension of their landscape as a dynamic defensive system, rather than perceiving security as a commodity provided by static constructions. They learned to interpret subtle indicators of disturbance or approach, to differentiate routine agricultural activity from unusual movement patterns that might signal impending threats. As complete darkness enveloped the Eurotas Valley, the unwalled essence of Sparta became perhaps most strikingly evident in the nocturnal routines of its citizenry. Unlike inhabitants of walled cities, who might relax once the gates were securely closed and locked for the evening, Spartans maintained a pervasive, distributed vigilance throughout the night. Regular patrols traversed both within and around the settlement. Households took turns maintaining watchfires. Younger men might be assigned to sleep at strategically important vantage points rather than in their customary quarters. This constant state of readiness was not perceived as burdensome or fear-inducing. It was simply the Spartan way, as intrinsic to them as the stone fortifications of Athens were to Athenians. The system fostered a community where security was everyone's constant, unspoken responsibility, rather than something exclusively delegated to specific guards or monumental structures. Before retiring for the night, Cleomatus meticulously ensured that their household weaponry was in optimal condition and strategically positioned for swift access if required, another ingrained routine in Spartan homes. Then she joined Charillus on the small, sheltered porch of their dwelling, where they sat in comfortable silence, observing the nascent stars emerge over their unwalled community. Their profound sense of security emanated not from towering fortifications, but from an unwavering confidence in themselves, their neighbors, and the meticulously maintained social system. The very absence of walls had sculpted not merely their city's physical configuration, but their entire philosophical approach to community and defense, forging a distinctive Spartan mindset that profoundly valued human readiness over inert physical barriers and disseminated vigilance over centralized protection. The revered sanctuary of Delphi was strategically positioned, not for ease of access, but for its profound spiritual significance. Perched majestically on the formidable slopes of Mount Parnassus, beneath the towering Phaedriades cliffs, the site was intentionally isolated, making the journey an integral part of the spiritual pilgrimage. This arduous ascent was designed to mirror the rigorous mental preparation required before seeking divine counsel. However, without a meticulously constructed and diligently maintained network of roads, this challenging expedition would frequently have been an insurmountable obstacle. Imagine a crisp spring dawn, many decades prior to the zenith of classical Greek civilization. The sun, a nascent ember, had just begun to kiss the eastern face of Mount Parnassus, while the valleys below remained shrouded in profound shadow. Upon a segment of the hallowed thoroughfare that snaked its way upwards towards Delphi, a man named Timocles was already diligently engaged in his labor, perpetuating a cherished family legacy that had spanned 3 generations. Timocles was neither a consecrated priest nor an inspired prophet. He was instead a master road builder, a member of a select cadre of specialized artisans whose expertise encompassed sophisticated engineering principles, robust physical endurance, and an intimate, almost symbiotic understanding of the distinctive geological contours of this particular landscape. His hands, testament to years of arduous toil, were heavily calloused from the unceasing manipulation of stone. His skin, a tapestry of sun and wind, bore the indelible marks of constant exposure to the elements. At the age of 43, He had dedicated his life to the construction and upkeep of the arterial routes leading to Delphi since his youth, initially assisting his father and subsequently assuming full responsibility for designated sections after demonstrating an undeniable aptitude and proficiency. On this particular morning, Timocles and his modest crew were diligently rectifying the ravages inflicted by the recent winter deluges. Several vital sections of the retaining wall had succumbed to displacement, leading to significant erosion of the road surface. Their work was characterized by a patient, meticulous methodology. Initially, they painstakingly cleared away accumulated debris, then carefully repositioned the dislodged stones, and finally, assiduously added fresh material to fully restore the integrity of the roadbed. They employed only rudimentary implements, sturdy wooden levers, robust ropes, and hammers for precision stone shaping when exigency demanded. There was no recourse to grand, sophisticated technology, merely the cumulative reservoir of human ingenuity applied with unwavering diligence and meticulous attention. As they toiled, their voices were hushed, engaging in conversations about the mundane realities of their lives, pressing family matters, the fluctuating market price of olive oil, and speculative musings on whether the forthcoming summer would prove exceptionally scorching. Occasionally, their discourse would pivot to the various pilgrims they had observed traversing this very path, which city-states appeared to be dispatching a greater number of envoys recently. Whether the intrinsic quality of the offerings being conveyed to the revered Apollo had undergone any discernible alteration, and how the behavioral patterns of travelers diverged based on their geographical origins. The seasoned road builders possessed an acute observational faculty, noticing subtleties that the pilgrims themselves might entirely overlook. They could discern with remarkable accuracy which travelers were embarking upon their inaugural journey to Delphi, evidenced by their hesitant gait and their profound reactions to certain breathtaking vistas that unexpectedly unfolded along the winding path. They readily recognized returning devotees who, year after year, habitually paused at the very same contemplative spots. They possessed an intimate knowledge of which particular sections of the road presented the greatest challenges for elderly pilgrims, or for those laboriously transporting wheeled carts laden with valuable votive offerings. By the zenith of the day, the team had achieved commendable progress. Timocles straightened his back, stretching away the accumulated strain, and cast his gaze upwards towards the mountain, in the direction of the sanctuary, which from this vantage point remained tantalizingly concealed. He had, despite decades of dedicated work on its approaches, only visited the inner sanctum of the temple itself a mere handful of times. The road builders occupied a fascinating interstitial position, undeniably crucial to the sanctuary's operational efficacy, yet distinctly separate from its solemn ceremonial functions. As they indulged in a brief respite, sharing simple sustenance of bread, cheese, and diluted wine in the dappled shade of a venerable plane tree, a procession of pilgrims passed by, distinguished representatives hailing from a city in distant Sicily, journeying to consult the omniscient oracle concerning a proposed colonial enterprise. The pilgrims, their minds singularly focused on their ultimate destination and the weighty questions they carried, scarcely registered the presence of the workers quietly resting by the roadside. Timocles and his steadfast companions observed them with a detached, yet mild interest, meticulously noting their distinctive sartorial choices, the evident quality of their provisions, and the nature of the offerings they were carefully transporting. The road builders had, over countless generations, developed an informal yet remarkably accurate taxonomy of pilgrims. They could frequently predict with astonishing precision which city-states were currently experiencing periods of burgeoning prosperity or enduring severe hardship, which were contemplating military engagements, or which were grappling with internal political turmoil, all gleaned from the subtle patterns they discerned in those embarking on the sacred journey to Delphi. That particular delegation will undoubtedly remain for at least 3 full days, remarked Cleon, the youngest and most observant member of the team. They have brought an abundance of provisions, and they are navigating the path with exceptional care, particularly with those shrouded objects, clearly valuable offerings that will necessitate a proper and elaborate ceremonial presentation. Timocles, a man of few words but profound insight, merely nodded in silent affirmation. After decades spent meticulously observing the ceaseless flow of travelers, such astute observations came to him as instinctively as noting shifts in meteorological patterns or the predictable seasonal cycles of indigenous flora. The road builders possessed a unique form of wisdom, distinct from yet undeniably complementary to the sagacity dispensed by the oracle itself. A pragmatic, deeply empirical understanding of human patterns and behaviors, meticulously gleaned from their unparalleled and privileged vantage point. Following their brief but restorative interlude, work recommenced with renewed vigor. This afternoon's specific undertaking involved the crucial reinforcement of a challenging switchback section where the road executed a precipitous turn around a formidable rocky outcrop. It was a task demanding exceptional precision and a nuanced comprehension of how torrential rainwater would course during heavy downpours, how immense weight would be judiciously distributed when heavily laden carts traversed the path, and how the insidious roots from proximate trees might gradually compromise the meticulous placement of stones. As they labored, Timocles, in his quiet way, imparted invaluable knowledge to young Cleon, not through formal didactic instruction, but through subtle, practical demonstrations and occasional pithy comments. This particular stone requires a deeper setting. Feel how this one possesses a natural curve that will effectively channel water into the designated drainage conduit. We shall strategically place the flattest stones on the uppermost layer to ensure easier and safer pedestrian passage. It was the precise method by which Timocles himself had absorbed the craft from his own father, and his father before him, a continuous lineage of knowledge transferred through shared, arduous work and diligent, careful observation. The venerable road to Delphi was not a singular, isolated construction project, but rather a profound, multi-generational commitment to unceasing maintenance and perpetual enhancement. Certain ancient sections meticulously followed routes established many centuries prior, gradually transitioning from rudimentary dirt tracks to properly formalized stone-paved thoroughfares. Other portions represented innovative, newer solutions to the perennial challenges posed by the mountain's capricious geology and unpredictable weather patterns. Different stretches of the road conspicuously displayed divergent building techniques, serving as a tangible physical record of evolving knowledge and craftsmanship. Here, an older section utilized colossal, irregularly shaped stones, meticulously fitted together with smaller pieces wedged artfully between them. There, a more recently constructed portion demonstrated more uniform cutting and precise gradient control. The road, in its entirety, was simultaneously a vital piece of practical infrastructure and a living historical document, eloquently revealing the transformative changes in technology and construction methodology over the inexorable march of time. As the afternoon gradually yielded to the encroaching evening, Timocles and his diligent team began the methodical task of gathering their tools. They would not undertake the journey back to the village nestled below, but would instead pass the night within the confines of a modest shelter specifically maintained for road workers at this particular elevation. These unpretentious structures, little more than robust stone walls crowned with simple wooden roofs, were strategically positioned at regular intervals along the labyrinthine mountain roads, thereby enabling maintenance teams to operate with optimal efficiency, obviating the need for arduous daily ascents and descents. The Spartan shelter contained rudimentary sleeping platforms, a functional hearth for the preparation of meals and for warmth, secure storage for tools and essential emergency supplies, and an ingenious water system meticulously designed to collect precious rainfall. It was not a place of luxurious comfort by the standards of the bustling towns below, yet it was profoundly familiar to Timocles, who had spent innumerable nights in similar, unadorned sanctuaries throughout his arduous working life. As they busied themselves preparing a simple evening repast, another lone traveler passed by, an elderly gentleman making his slow, deliberate descent down the mountain, returning from his pilgrimage to the revered sanctuary. He paused upon noticing the road workers, approached their flickering fire, and courteously inquired if he might rest briefly before continuing his arduous journey. They welcomed him warmly, offering a place by their fire and a refreshing cup of watered wine. The venerable old man had been undertaking this sacred pilgrimage annually for many decades. He recounted how he distinctly remembered when this particular section of the road was significantly different, prior to the crucial improvements made during Timocles' father's time. He spoke of the transformative changes with genuine appreciation, noting how considerably easier the journey had become, particularly for older visitors such as himself. This was a rare and precious moment of direct acknowledgement for work that, by its very nature, usually went entirely unnoticed. The road builders did not receive the grand honors or public recognition routinely bestowed upon the priests or the official functionaries of the sanctuary. Their names were conspicuously absent from the elaborate inscriptions that adorned Delphi's magnificent monuments. Yet, their tireless work intrinsically touched every single facet of the oracle's intricate operation, facilitating the unimpeded flow of pressing questions, valuable offerings, and profound wisdom that singularly defined the sanctuary's paramount purpose. As the profound darkness descended upon the majestic mountain, their visitor continued on his downward journey, moving with careful deliberation, aided by his trusty walking stick. Timocles and his dedicated team settled into their familiar evening routine, meticulously checking their tools, quietly discussing the exigencies of the following day's work, and sharing hushed conversation before succumbing to sleep. From their elevated vantage point, they could discern small, twinkling lights beginning to appear in the valley below as distant households illuminated their evening lamps. Above them, the myriad stars emerged with breathtaking clarity in the pristine mountain air. This unique, interstitial existence, neither fully integrated into the sacred sanctuary above, nor entirely rooted in the bustling villages below, had profoundly shaped a particular and distinctive perspective among the road builders. They perceived themselves as essential facilitators rather than central actors in the grand, unfolding drama of divine consultation. Their profound satisfaction stemmed not from external recognition or accolades, but from the intrinsic functionality of their work, from the deep, quiet knowledge that, owing to their unwavering efforts, an elderly man could safely undertake his annual pilgrimage. The esteemed representatives of a city could transport invaluable offerings without fear of damage, or a worried parent could bring a sick child to seek divine healing and solace. Timocles drifted into slumber, his mind preoccupied with a formidable engineering conundrum that loomed later in the week, a particular stretch of road where subterranean water ceaselessly eroded the foundations of their prior remedies, necessitating innovative methodologies. His final conscious reflections were not on deities or prophetic pronouncements, but rather on the precise placement of stones and the optimal angles for drainage, the tangible puzzles that had meticulously occupied his intellect throughout his extensive working life. Even as he reposed, devout travelers continued their journey along the thoroughfare he meticulously cared for, some navigating the darkness of night by the flickering illumination of torches. Eager to reach the sacred sanctuary by dawn, their feet found steadfast traction on surfaces forged over countless decades by Timocles' family and others dedicated to the same craft. Their arduous paths were diligently protected by robust embankments, specifically engineered to endure the onslaught of severe winter storms and torrential summer downpours. The oracle's renowned wisdom, those enigmatic pronouncements that profoundly shaped decisions affecting thousands, traveled out into the broader world along these very same arteries, borne by pilgrims returning to their distant cities. The roads thus served as vital conduits not just for physical transit, but for the profound movement of ideas, pressing inquiries, and divine guidance between the hallowed grounds of Delphi and the wider Hellenic sphere. He was neither a figure of ecclesiastical authority nor political sway, not a philosopher whose profound words would resonate across epochs, nor an artist whose creations would ignite the imaginations of future eras. He was merely an officiant dedicated to the meticulous enumeration of sacrifices, the man who maintained precise records of offerings made to Athena, the revered patron goddess of Athens. His name was Philocrates, and for 27 years he diligently served in a position that integrated the diverse facets of accountant, inspector, inventory manager, and religious functionary. Every presentation that arrived at Athena's temple on the Acropolis passed under his unwavering examination. Each beast immolated, every sacred draft offered, every votive artifact presented, all were scrupulously documented in his precise calligraphy on ephemeral waxen slates and enduring papyri. Imagine a radiant vernal dawn in Athens, the kind where the ambient light seemed to imbue the marble of the Parthenon with an ethereal luminescence. Philocrates, having reached his 53rd annum, had already been engaged in his duties for a considerable duration. He awakened prior to daybreak most days, a custom cultivated since his formative years and steadfastly maintained through decades of unwavering application. His workspace was a modest room attached to the temple complex, devoid of ostentatious splendor or imposing grandeur, but eminently functional, boasting ample illumination from a south-facing window and repositories laden with recording materials and previous archival documents. His morning routine commenced with diligently scrutinizing the records from the preceding 24 hours, corroborating his numerical summaries with the tangible remnants yet visible, residues within the hallowed braziers, vinous marks upon the consecrated stones. recently positioned devotional items on the dedication shelves. This meticulous verification was not because he questioned his personal computations, but because precision in observances pertaining to the divine was not merely exemplary practice, but a hallowed obligation. An erroneously tallied immolation could signify insufficient reverence to Athena. An overlooked presentation might suggest dereliction in sacred ministration. The implements of Philocrates' work were unpretentious yet effective. Wax-coated wooden slates for ephemeral daily jottings, papyrus for enduring archival documents, calamus writing instruments, pigment derived from gall nuts, and a small collection of arithmetic aids, small stones for rudimentary enumeration, and a counting frame for intricate calculations. His hands displayed the subtle hallmarks of his vocation, not the indurations from strenuous toil, but the faint discolorations from writing fluid around his fingernails, a minor curvature to his right index finger from numerous lustrums of script, and a small cauterization mark on his left palm from a mishap involving a molten seal years ago. By mid-morning, the sacred precinct bustled with heightened animation. Today was not a grand celebratory occasion, merely a typical diurnal period in Athens. Yet even ordinary days brought a constant influx of devotional presentations. A trader newly arrived back from a lucrative maritime expedition brought a chalice of precious metal for consecration. A matron whose offspring had regained health from illness offered a modest terracotta effigy. An agriculturist proffered a caprine beast for immolation and grateful acknowledgement for precipitation that preserved his harvest. Each presentation adhered to prescribed rites, with sacred officiants executing the requisite observances. Philocrates monitored from his unobtrusive vantage point slightly to the side, not at the focal point of the rites, but indispensable for their accurate documentation. He registered beyond mere occurrence of each sacrifice or dedication, noting particularized minutiae, the vintage and condition of the beasts, the artistry and composition of the artifacts, the social standing of the donor, and the declared intention behind the presentation. These details held profound significance for various rationales. They facilitated the discernment of trends in devotional customs across eras. They furnished insights into the fiscal prosperity of the polis. Costlier dedications tended to appear in periods of affluence, while epochs of scarcity saw more unadorned presentations. They established an archive available for reference if inquiries emerged concerning whether due veneration had been upheld. Furthermore, they assisted sacerdotal administrators in overseeing logistical exigencies like the apportionment of immolated flesh or the organization of votive items within confined confines. Around midday, Philocrates takes a short respite, ambling deliberately along the circumferences of the temple. This habitual diurnal practice affords his vision a reprieve from intensive scrutiny and offers an opportunity for contemplative admiration of the hallowed precinct to which he dedicates himself. Though he has beheld the iconic Parthenon countless millennia, he still finds himself lingering to contemplate how the shifting illumination dances upon its carved effigies, or how the imperceptible entasis of its pillars engenders an illusion of unblemished rectilinearity. During his walk, he encounters a fellow functionary who oversees the fiscal archives for the temple. Their work intersects yet remains distinct. While Philocrates enumerates every presentation irrespective of its pecuniary worth, his colleague concentrates solely on monitoring precious artifacts and coinage. Their conversation is concise and pragmatic. addressing an incongruity in the summaries from the preceding month that requires rectification and discussing the impending ceremonial arrangements that will amplify their professional responsibilities. Returning to his duties, Philocrates spends the afternoon methodically organizing documentation of a significant immolation funded by one of the city's affluent Athenian households. The presentation, comprising numerous bovine beasts, necessitates comprehensive record-keeping beyond merely the beasts in question, extending to the subsequent apportionment of the flesh. Some segments are allocated to the sacerdotal order, some to the patronizing kin, and some to denizens present at the communal offering. Guaranteeing equitable and appropriate allocation in adherence to established custom is a complex organizational endeavor that is partially overseen by Philocrates. As he methodically progresses through these computations, a young man named Theocritos discreetly watches. He's been designated as Philocrates' aide and prospective inheritor of the mantle, assimilating the intricate methodology of record-keeping that has developed across countless eras. The position of sacrifice counter is not a birthright, but demands comprehensive tutelage not merely in numeracy and literacy, but in comprehending sacred observances, identifying various forms of presentations, and upholding the nuanced equilibrium between operational efficacy and hallowed reverence. Philocrates imparts knowledge not via structured instruction, but through practical exemplification and intermittent elucidation. Notice, he tells Theocritos, how we document not solely the quantity of beasts, but also their inherent condition. An imperfect creature necessitates notation, not because the divinity spurns such presentations from devout adherents of humble circumstances, but because particular sacred rites explicitly demand faultless creatures. Our meticulous documentation aids in guaranteeing suitable correlations between ceremonial prerequisites and devotional gifts. As the latter part of the day drifts towards dusk, a contingent appears from an outlying territorial division, local district, outside Athens proper. They've come with their annual presentation, a tribute of oleaginous liquid sourced from their shared orchards, customarily provided to sustain the perpetual luminescence in a modest sanctuary consecrated to the goddess Athena. Such consistent presentations constitute the fundamental support for the temple's functioning, furnishing indispensable provisions for continuous sacred ceremonies. Philocrates greets them with the serene gravitas that distinguishes his engagements with every devotee, whether influential civic magistrates or unpretentious tillers of the soil. He examines the oleum, verifying its limpidity and excellence, then quantifies it with exactitude before documenting the volume within his register. The group observes this procedure with deferential focus. The meticulous assessment validates that their presentation is duly recognized and shall be utilized according to its designated purpose. This interaction underscores a further crucial dimension of Philocrates' role. He functions as both attester and warrantor that presentations attain their designated recipient. In a devotional framework lacking a singular governing body or canonical scriptures, correct adherence relies significantly upon faithfully preserved custom and unclouded methodology. The scrupulous documentation maintained by individuals such as Philocrates contributes to the consistent fulfillment of divine commitments, irrespective of alterations in staffing or governmental conditions. As the diurnal luminescence gradually mellows into twilight, Philocrates finalizes his ultimate enumerations and arranges his implements for the ensuing 24 hours. This liminal interval, neither entirely diurnal nor wholly nocturnal, is when he customarily transcribes data from ephemeral waxen memoranda to more enduring papyri documents. The tranquil sanctuary, with the majority of supplicants having now left, furnishes optimal circumstances for focused labor demanding meticulousness. The dedicated endeavor demands meticulous precision. The enduring chronicles, meticulously fashioned by Philocrates, transcend mere religious bookkeeping, fulfilling an array of vital functions. They seamlessly integrate into the very fabric of Athens' institutional memory, serving as invaluable documentation for reference during civic disputes, offering profound historical context to current events, or enabling the discernment of patterns necessitating administrative intervention. For instance, when successive years of drought reveal a marked decline in animal sacrifices, city officials might prudently recognize the impending necessity for substantial grain imports. Conversely, as the ominous specter of war looms, these same records could highlight a discernible surge in votive offerings directed towards Athena, particularly invoking her protective aspect over the polis. Beyond these tangible administrative applications, Philocrates' meticulously maintained records forge an unbreakable, palpable link between the devotional practices of the past and the observances of the present. As he carefully unrolls and pores over ancient scrolls, some perhaps containing entries inscribed decades prior by his own predecessors during his formative years, he actively participates in an unbroken continuum of sacred practice. This enduring lineage of devotion effortlessly transcends the ephemeral span of individual human existence. The veneration of Athena within the venerable city of Athens predated his birth and will assuredly persist long after his passing. Yet, for this singular epoch in time, he stands as its diligent and discerning chronicler, ensuring its documented perpetuity. As the cloak of evening decisively descends and the soft glow of lamps begins to illuminate the sprawling temple complex, Philocrates concludes his day's work, preparing to embark on his journey back to his unassuming dwelling nestled within the city, beneath the majestic Acropolis. Prior to his departure, he observes a small, deeply personal ritual, a brief, heartfelt supplication to Athena. This prayer is offered not at the grand, publicly accessible altar, but within the quiet sanctity of a modest shrine tucked away in a corner of his private workroom. It represents a serene interlude of profound connection between the solitary individual and the encompassing divine, a subtle communion bridging the precise enumerator and the sacred entities he so diligently accounts for. Descending from the lofty heights of the Acropolis, Philocrates encounters various groups still making their ascent, individuals arriving either to present their evening offerings or simply to behold the mesmerizing transition from daylight to night within the hallowed confines of this sacred precinct. He extends a respectful nod to those familiar faces he recognizes, yet he refrains from engaging in prolonged conversation. Following an entire day devoted to observing and meticulously documenting the religious expressions of others, he cherishes this tranquil period for solitary, internal contemplation. His customary route homeward guides him through the bustling agora, which now gradually begins to quieten as the day's commercial fervor subsides. He pauses momentarily at the stall of a bread seller. The woman, recognizing him as a devoted regular patron, thoughtfully reserves a specific, dark, artisanal loaf that he particularly favors. Their brief exchange, though succinct, radiates a genuine warmth, a small but significant instance of human rapport within a professional role, often characterized more by detached observation than by direct personal engagement. Within the confines of his home, Philocrates embraces a life of unpretentious simplicity. His esteemed position yields a modest yet consistently dependable income, perfectly adequate for his personal requirements, though it certainly does not facilitate the accumulation of significant wealth. His dwelling contains few ostentatious luxuries, yet it proudly houses a small, personally curated assortment of calculating instruments originating from diverse geographical regions. These tools, remarkably akin to his professional implements, have been painstakingly acquired over many years from itinerant traders or esteemed visitors to Athens. Each device boasts a subtly distinct design, eloquently reflecting the unique local mathematical customs and practices, serving as a silent, compelling testament to how fundamental human necessities, in this particular instance, the imperative of counting, manifest in myriad, culturally varied expressions across the globe. After partaking in a simple, unadorned evening repast, Philocrates frequently immerses himself in reading not religious treatises or profound philosophical discourses, but rather practical works focused on the intricacies of mathematics and precise measurement. Presently, he is engrossed in a detailed text elucidating ancient Egyptian accounting methodologies, driven by an insatiable curiosity regarding how another venerable civilization, renowned for its elaborate religious offerings, effectively managed its complex record-keeping systems. This ongoing intellectual pursuit, while not formally mandated by his official role, eloquently underscores his profound and genuine interest in the underlying systems that empower humankind to systematically organize their multifaceted interactions, both with one another and with the divine. Perhaps one is drawn to ponder the frequently unsung yet indispensable labor of record-keepers throughout the annals of history. Those diligent individuals who meticulously generated the very documentation through which contemporary society comprehends and interprets past civilizations. Alternatively, one might find solace in this poignant reminder that religious observance in ancient Greece encompassed not solely moments of inspired divine communion, but also demanded careful, unwavering administrative diligence. Thus, the sacred and the procedural, far from existing in opposition, were inextricably bound in a mutually essential partnership. Our exploration will now pivot to examine another often overlooked dimension of Greek religious existence, the quiet, yet utterly fundamental task of perpetually tending Hestia's sacred flames, the venerable hearth fires that profoundly symbolized the enduring vitality of the household, the cohesive community, and the very stability of the state. As our gentle expedition through the more understated facets of ancient Greek daily life proceeds, let us now direct our collective focus towards what might arguably be considered the most frequently neglected of all the principal Olympian deities, Hestia, the revered goddess of the hearth and home. While the mighty Zeus wielded thunderbolts with unparalleled authority, and Poseidon commanded the vast, tumultuous seas, Hestia's sacred domain was confined to the unassuming hearth fire. Yet, no other divine power maintained a more constant and intimate presence in the fabric of daily Greek existence, and none demanded a more continuous and devoted human effort for its perpetual sustenance. Within the intricate hierarchy of the Greek pantheon, Hestia occupied a singularly intriguing position. Despite being one of the 6 original Olympian siblings, a direct daughter of Kronos and Rhea, and a sister to the formidable Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, and Demeter. She makes remarkably rare appearances in the rich tapestry of myths or in the extant artistic representations of the era. She notably never chose to marry or bear children, nor did she ever become entangled in the boisterous divine squabbles or embark upon grand adventures alongside legendary heroes. Nevertheless, notwithstanding this profound narrative absence, she was universally accorded the first portion of every household sacrifice and meticulously maintained sacred fires within the heart of every Greek community. To truly grasp the profound significance of Hestia and her consecrated fires, one must first comprehend the multifaceted practical and symbolic import of the hearth within the ancient Greek way of life. Envision a typical, unpretentious home, be it within the bustling city of Athens or a tranquil village nestled in the countryside. At its very core, both literally in its physical placement and metaphorically as its spiritual nexus, a vibrant hearth fire perpetually glows. This is far more than a mere flame for cooking or a simple source of warmth. It is the living, pulsating heart of the household, a subtle yet potent divine presence residing intimately among mortals. Let us now embark upon a journey through a typical day, observing the quiet, indispensable labor involved in sustaining Hestia's ubiquitous presence. Our narrative will center on the home of Deiris, a middle-aged Athenian woman whose household graciously accommodates her husband Nicias, a skilled carpenter, their 3 lively children, Nicias's venerable elderly father, and 2 household slaves. Deiris commences her day well before the first blush of dawn, when the entire house remains cloaked in a profound silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping occupants and the faint, subtle crackle emanating from the banked hearth fire. Her paramount task each morning is to gently coax this fire back to vigorous life, not by igniting it anew, a practice reserved for specific, unusual circumstances, but by assiduously nurturing the glowing coals that have been carefully preserved throughout the preceding night. This morning ritual is never executed with haste or indifference. Deiris kneels reverently before the hearth, her movements imbued with the quiet, unwavering focus of someone deeply engaged in a sacred undertaking. She delicately brushes aside the layer of ash that blankets the coals, then painstakingly adds small pieces of kindling, dried aromatic herbs, slender twigs, fragments of straw, and softly breathes upon them, tenderly encouraging the nascent flames to strengthen and rise. As the fire steadily gains strength and luminosity, she utters a brief, whispered prayer to Hestia. This is not an elaborate, formally structured invocation, but rather the kind of familiar, intimate communication that naturally blossoms between an individual and the divine presence they diligently attend to on a daily basis. The hearth itself is unadorned and functional, a circular clay structure elevated slightly above the floor level, strategically positioned to allow its smoke to ascend directly through an opening in the roof. It is encircled by deeply worn stones, bearing the indelible marks of countless decades of continuous use. This particular hearth was established when Nicias's grandfather erected the house 2 generations prior, and its sacred fire has been meticulously maintained without interruption ever since. Its guardianship faithfully transferred from mother-in-law to daughter-in-law as household responsibilities transitioned across generations. As Deiris meticulously tends to the fire, her movements are neither hurried nor ritualized in any rigid formal sense. Instead, they demonstrate the fluid efficiency and effortless grace of actions performed thousands of times before, now ingrained into muscle memory. Each individual household cultivates its own distinct practices for hearth maintenance, a collection of small, cherished traditions passed down through generations via careful observation and diligent practice, rather than through any written instruction. The specific manner in which Deiris arranges the kindling, the particular herbs she occasionally introduces to the flames, the precise pattern she employs when sweeping the hearth area, all these subtle nuances eloquently reflect a rich tapestry of accumulated household custom, honed over generations. Once the fire is properly roused and burning vigorously, Deiris transitions to the next phase of her morning routine, preparing the morning meal. Cooking over Hestia's sacred fire is perceived as more than a mere practical necessity. It is, in essence, a direct continuation of divine service. The boundary between formal religious observance and the prosaic activities of daily life is remarkably permeable here. The very same flame that reverently receives formal offerings also diligently cooks the family's nourishing food, heats their water for washing, and generously provides comforting warmth on crisp, cool mornings. As other members of the household gradually awaken and congregate around the inviting warmth of the hearth, each individual acknowledges Hestia's benevolent presence in their own unique and personal way. Nicias's elderly father, despite his limited mobility, performs a small, respectful gesture towards the flickering flames before accepting his morning meal. The children, from their earliest awareness, have been assiduously taught never to spit into the fire, to never discard refuse into its depths, or to treat it with any degree of casual disrespect. This strict adherence stems not from mere superstition, but from a profound understanding that the hearth embodies something far grander and more significant than its purely physical manifestation. Throughout the entire day, Deiris, or another designated member of the household, remains acutely aware of the fire's ongoing requirements. Unlike modern appliances that can be effortlessly deactivated and subsequently forgotten, the ancient hearth demands ceaseless, vigilant attention. Fuel must be added at appropriate intervals, ashes carefully managed, and occasional adjustments made to ensure a proper, efficient burn. This continuous oversight is not perceived as an arduous burden, but rather as an organic, natural rhythm, seamlessly integrated into the myriad other activities that constitute daily household life. By the arrival of midday, Deiris is typically engaged in the intricate art of weaving, while simultaneously keeping a watchful, occasional eye on the hearth fire. Her youngest child, a girl of 7, sits nearby, diligently learning simple fiber preparation techniques under her mother's gentle guidance. Their conversation flows effortlessly, transitioning smoothly between practical instruction, such as, "You'll hold the wool like this between your fingers," and engaging, casual stories, some of which invariably feature Hestia herself. They speak of how she famously chose to tend the central fire of Olympus rather than succumb to marriage, how she gracefully mediates disputes among the other gods without ever taking sides, and how she subtly imparts the virtue of patience through the slow, transformative process of converting raw ingredients into nourishing, sustaining food. The transformation of raw ingredients into wholesome and sustaining sustenance was a fundamental aspect of daily existence. When a neighbor arrives to borrow a culinary implement, her entry into the household is marked by a momentary pause before the hearth, a subtle yet profound gesture, acknowledging that her reception extends beyond the mere physical confines of the dwelling. She is, in fact, being welcomed into a sacred realm, a domain safeguarded by another family's Hestia. This understated act of deference eloquently illustrates the profound depth to which divine presence was interwoven into the very fabric of societal customs and interactions. The hearth, in this context, served as a potent symbolic threshold, delineating the transition from the external world to the internal sanctuary, from the public sphere to the private intimacy of the home, and from the status of an outsider to that of a cherished guest. The most profoundly significant ritual associated with the hearth invariably occurred during the evening meal, which typically represented the most substantial repast of the day and was the occasion most likely to gather all members of the household. Before the family commenced their dining, Nicias, who presided as the esteemed head of the household, would reverently offer a modest portion of food and a few precious drops of wine to the flickering flames. This was not an elaborate, formal sacrifice accompanied by intricate prayers, but rather a simple, heartfelt acknowledgement of Hestia's supreme priority. She received the inaugural portion of the meal because her benevolent presence rendered all other aspects of their domestic life and sustenance possible. The family would partake of their meal in the immediate vicinity of the hearth, their communal circle subtly mirroring the inherent circular form of the hearth itself. Engaging conversation would flow effortlessly, revolving around the quotidian rhythms of their lives, the various tasks and labors accomplished throughout the day, essential items that needed to be procured from the bustling market, intriguing news and rumors overheard in the vibrant agora, and anticipatory plans for an upcoming festive celebration. The fire, in its radiant warmth, provided not merely physical comfort and the means for cooked provisions, but also served as a compelling focal point, effectively drawing the individual members of the household into a cohesive and harmonious community. As the evening hours gradually deepened, the flurry of activity surrounding the hearth would correspondingly diminish. The younger children, their eyelids heavy with slumber, would be gently escorted to their beds in another, quieter part of the house. Nicias, ever diligent, would occupy himself by making minor repairs to a piece of furniture, utilizing the soft, ambient glow of the fire as his illumination. His venerable father would recount captivating tales of his own youthful escapades to the eldest boy, weaving narratives that bridged generations. Dearest, with practiced hands, would meticulously complete her preparations for the following day's bread-making, carefully arranging ingredients that would be ready for her attention when she rekindled the vital flames at the break of dawn. The concluding hearth ritual of the day involved the careful process of banking the fire, a meticulous procedure of covering the embers with a layer of ash to preserve the glowing coals throughout the nocturnal hours, thereby preventing active flames from consuming the fuel too rapidly. This delicate operation demanded an acute understanding of the precise quantity of ash required. An excessive amount could inadvertently smother the fire entirely, extinguishing its lifeblood, whereas an insufficient covering might permit it to burn with too much vigor, thereby exhausting itself prematurely before the advent of morning. Dearest, through countless repetitions and years of dedicated practice, performed this essential task most evenings, having refined her technique to an exquisite degree of precision. The profound significance of maintaining a continuous fire within the household became strikingly apparent when one contemplated the formidable alternatives. Should a domestic fire completely expire, it could not be casually reignited using rudimentary friction methods, which were notoriously arduous and inherently unreliable. Instead, fire had to be painstakingly transported from an alternative hearth, ideally from the community's public hearth, meticulously maintained within the Prytanion, the civic town hall. This was not merely a pragmatic solution to a logistical challenge, but also a deeply symbolic ritual of reconnection, a tacit acknowledgement that individual household fires ultimately derived their essence and vitality from the collective communal fire of the entire settlement. These public hearths served as powerful embodiments of Hestia's pervasive presence at the very core of civic life. In the illustrious city of Athens, the public hearth situated within the Prytaneon burned with an unceasing flame, diligently tended by specially designated officials. When intrepid colonists embarked upon their journeys to establish new settlements, they would reverently carry a portion of fire from this sacred hearth to their new locations, thereby ensuring an unbroken spiritual connection to their community of origin. In this profound manner, Hestia's fires intricately linked individual families to their broader communities to their ancestral past, and burgeoning colonies to their venerable mother cities, forging a powerful continuum that transcended both spatial and temporal boundaries. The meticulous upkeep of these public hearths necessitated more formalized rituals compared to the informal observances within households, yet their essence remained rooted in the practical, daily labor of fire tending. In certain cities, this weighty responsibility was entrusted to young women prior to their marriage, or to older women who had passed their childbearing years, symbolizing a different phase of life service. In other locales, male officials oversaw the fire, though frequently with the invaluable assistance of female attendants who performed the actual tending. These were not glamorous religious positions replete with elaborate ceremonies, but rather roles of steady, unceasing daily service, demanding an unwavering patience and consistent, dedicated attention. Returning to Dyrrhus's tranquil home, with the hearth now properly banked for the night, a profound stillness descended upon the dwelling. The last individual to retire for the evening would pause momentarily by the fire, perhaps gently touching the warm, comforting stones of the hearth's edge, or perhaps offering a softly whispered goodnight to the unseen, protective presence that would vigilantly watch over the household through the encompassing darkness. Even in their slumber, the family members remained subtly oriented around Hestia's revered domain, with their sleeping areas traditionally arranged in respectful deference to the hearth's central position. The physical edifice that embraced this family, comprising its sturdy wooden beams, solid stone walls, and protective clay roof tiles, undoubtedly provided essential shelter. However, it was Hestia's sacred fire that truly transmuted this mere structure into a cherished home. Should the family ever find it necessary to relocate, they would reverently carry fire from this hearth to their new dwelling, thereby ensuring the unbroken continuity of the same divine presence across disparate physical locations. This profound understanding of home as being centered upon sacred fire, rather than merely a physical construction, profoundly shaped ancient Greek conceptions of belonging and displacement. To be utterly without a hearth and a home signified far more than simple homelessness in the material sense. It represented a profound disengagement from the divine human relationship that meticulously anchored individual identity within the intricate tapestry of family and community. One might be compelled to contemplate the inherent focal points within one's own living environment, What elements serve to center and unify? What aspects demand regular, diligent attention? And what ultimately transforms a mere structure into a place imbued with profound meaning? Although very few contemporary homes feature literal hearth fires, the innate human yearning for centering and the inherent sacredness of the concept of home have remained an unwavering constant throughout the annals of centuries. For our concluding exploration into the more subdued and often overlooked facets of ancient Greek life, let us now direct our collective attention to the intricate network of waterways that seamlessly connected the geographically dispersed regions of the Greek world. Across these waters, ranging from narrow, winding rivers to the expansive, azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, traversed innumerable small boats, expertly guided by men whose names have been largely effaced by the currents of history. The ordinary boatmen who diligently transported heroes, astute merchants, devout pilgrims, and everyday travelers alike. Although rarely accorded prominence in the grand narratives of myths or the meticulous chronicles of historical accounts, these unassuming figures provided the utterly essential service of connection in a land whose identity was sculpted as much by its surrounding waters as by its terrestrial landscapes. When we encounter tales of Theseus embarking upon his perilous voyage to Crete to confront the formidable Minotaur, or Jason leading the intrepid Argonauts in their arduous quest for the legendary Golden Fleece, our focus invariably gravitates towards the heroic protagonists themselves. Yet, it remains an undeniable truth that someone was indispensable for managing those vessels, possessing an intimate understanding of shifting winds and treacherous currents, and navigating through perilous passages. These anonymous boatmen, whether they were hired professionals or conscripted crew members, rendered every mythic journey conceivable through their invaluable practical knowledge and their unwavering daily labor. Let us endeavor to envision one such man, whom we shall affectionately name Dorius. At the age of 45, he has dedicated 3 decades of his life to working upon the water. Having commenced his maritime career as a young boy, assisting his father, he now skillfully operates his own modest vessel, a robust wooden boat, approximately 20 feet in length, propelled by both sails and oars, depending on the prevailing conditions. His primary and most frequent route establishes a vital link between Athens and several neighboring coastal communities, occasionally extending to more distant ports when lucrative opportunities present themselves. We encounter Dorius on an ordinary late summer morning at the bustling port of Piraeus, Athens's vibrant harbor. He has arrived before the first blush of dawn to meticulously prepare his boat for the day's demanding work, diligently verifying that the hull remains structurally sound, that the sail exhibits no new tiers requiring immediate repair, and that the oars are securely fastened within their locks. These essential tasks are executed with the methodical precision and unwavering care of an individual whose very livelihood and safety are inextricably dependent upon the unfailing reliability of his equipment. His vessel, while humble in its appearance, represents the culmination of generations of practical design evolution. Its carefully conceived shape artfully balances stability against speed, and its draft against its crucial carrying capacity. The timber used in its construction has been judiciously selected, expertly cut, and meticulously joined, subsequently rendered watertight with a coating of pitch. The sail, expertly woven from a tough, resilient fabric, necessitates regular treatment to resist the corrosive effects of constant exposure to salt water. Every single element of his craft eloquently reflects a vast repository of accumulated knowledge, assiduously passed down from one boatman to another, rarely committed to written form, but faithfully preserved through diligent practice. As the eastern sky gradually brightens, potential passengers begin to converge upon the harbor. Dorius does not adhere to a rigid, fixed schedule akin to modern transportation services. He embarks upon his journeys when he has amassed a sufficient number of passengers or an adequate volume of cargo to render the voyage economically viable. He is, however, widely renowned for his unwavering reliability, and regular travelers understand that they can generally find him prepared to set sail by mid-morning. Today's initial passenger is a merchant named Critias, who requires transportation to a coastal town situated approximately 4 hours' journey away. He is conveying samples of exquisite Athenian pottery, intended for display to prospective buyers. Although not a voluminous cargo, its inherent value amply justifies the transportation fee. Dorius meticulously assists him in carefully stowing the delicate samples within the boat's small covered section, where they will be effectively shielded from any spray. Their exchange is concise and purely pragmatic, touching upon the day's anticipated weather conditions and the projected duration of their voyage. This is by no means their inaugural interaction. Cratius undertakes this particular journey on a regular basis and has developed a decided preference for Dorius's vessel over other options available at the harbor. He profoundly appreciates the boatman's meticulous navigation and his commendable absence of unnecessary stops, qualities that hold particular significance when one is transporting fragile merchandise. As the morning progresses, additional passengers gradually arrive. 2 women embarking on a journey to visit family members residing in the coastal town, a young man serving as a crucial messenger between various scattered family properties, and an older traveler who does not disclose his specific business, but promptly tenders his payment. Each individual exchanges brief greetings with Dorius, who courteously assists them in boarding and finding suitable seating within the boat's limited confines. He remains acutely attentive to proper weight distribution, subtly adjusting cargo to compensate for the passenger's arrangement, ensuring optimal balance throughout the journey. Once the painstaking process of loading had been meticulously completed to his satisfaction, Dorius meticulously scrutinized the celestial expanse and the tranquil surface of the water for the final time. He was adept at interpreting atmospheric indicators, discerning subtle weather signs that would invariably elude the notice of those unfamiliar with the sea. The ephemeral formations in the firmament, the distinctive hue of the nascent day, and the ornithological cues provided by seabirds congregating near the harbor. The prevailing conditions appeared eminently propitious for sailing, rather than necessitating the arduous task of rowing, at least for the commencement of their voyage. Consequently, he executed minute calibrations to the sail rigging, preparing for their departure. With an expert maneuver, a seasoned thrust against the dock, the craft gracefully glided into the expansive expanse of open water. Dorius then assumed his post at the stern, one hand resting upon the steering oar that served as their primary means of direction. He maintained a largely taciturn demeanor whilst piloting, speaking only when absolutely requisite for the safety of those aboard, or to draw attention to some point of particular interest for his passengers. His attention remained unwavering, entirely consumed by his work, ceaselessly assessing atmospheric currents, vigilantly watching for variations in the aquatic hue that might betray submerged perils. and exercising constant vigilance regarding other vessels sharing these frequently busy waters. The journey itself unfolded with placid regularity, devoid of any untoward incident, precisely as Dorius held as his ideal. He engaged in perpetual, minute rectifications to their course and sail position, deftly mitigating the effects of imperceptible fluctuations in both wind and current. To uninitiated spectators, the boat might have seemed to advance with minimal overt intervention, tracing the coastline at an unwavering velocity. Indeed, only someone possessed of seasoned nautical insight would discern the unremitting, incremental judgments and precise adjustments that collectively forged this appearance of seamless, effortless progress. As they passed various identifiable landmarks along the route, Dorius internally benchmarked their timing against his personal temporal framework. So profound was his familiarity with this passage that he could accurately ascertain their advancement without recourse to any instrumental aids beyond the celestial alignment of the sun. This profound knowledge was not the fruit of structured academic instruction, but rather the culmination of decades of keen scrutiny and the inherited sagacity shared by veteran mariners during his formative years learning the trade. Around the midday hour, the atmospheric current veered adversely, rendering continued sailing less propitious. Devoid of vocal objection or grumbling, Dorius swiftly modified their navigational strategy, furling the canvas and enlisting the assistance of two robust travelers to contribute their brawn to the propulsion at the oars. This metamorphosis from wind-powered transit to manual locomotion was not framed as an impediment or an inconvenience, but simply as the inherent adjustment to evolving circumstances that seafaring demands. As the passengers engaged in the rhythmic motion of rowing, the syncopated cadence of the paddles created a mesmerizing accompaniment for their subdued discourse. The messenger imparted recent tidings to the visiting women. The merchant, for his part, intermittently indicated various elements of the ephemeral vista passing them by. Dorius, whilst maintaining an unwavering concentration on piloting, subtly assimilated their discourse, thereby augmenting his repository of regional intelligence. Which households, he wondered, anticipated guests? Which communities had undergone recent transformations? Which mercantile flows were thriving or diminishing? This intelligence acquisition was not driven by idle chatter or curiosity, but by a utilitarian imperative. A boatman's sustenance was, in part, contingent upon comprehending migratory trends and mercantile flows, discerning when specific demographics of voyagers might require conveyance, which passages could yield greater or lesser financial returns, and how socio-political or fiscal shifts might impact nautical transit. Dorius assiduously amassed these perceptions, constructing a cognitive chart of his sphere of operation that transcended mere seafaring considerations. When they paused momentarily in a secluded inlet to rejuvenate the oarsmen and allow passengers to alleviate their stiffness, Dorius conducted a swift scrutiny of the vessel. He checked diligently that no fresh breaches had appeared, as small boats of this era inherently required routine bilge clearing, that the freight was adequately fastened, and that the paddles were free from fissures that might deteriorate with sustained application. During this brief interval, he exchanged concise salutations with another boatman heading in the opposite direction. Their conversation, though terse, was pregnant with data, covering prevailing aquatic circumstances downstream, the existence of any substantial craft to be aware of, and whether port authorities at their respective destinations seemed to be levying tariffs with unusual zeal today. This unstructured conduit of intelligence among mariners served as a precautionary alert mechanism for anything that might jeopardize secure transit. As they recommenced their voyage, now propelled by a more propitious breeze allowing them to revert to canvas propulsion, one of the women posed a circuitous inquiry to Dorius, asking if he had encountered any particularly noteworthy voyagers recently. Such an indirect question often served as an implicit encouragement for mariners to recount anecdotes about extraordinary clientele or significant occurrences. Dorius responded with a succinct narrative concerning the conveyance of an artisan of form and his almost finished masterpiece, a sculpted effigy of stone that had necessitated intricate fastening to avert impairment from the boat's movement. His storytelling was notably unembellished, focusing squarely on the logistical hurdles rather than any theatrical components. This approach reflected a pervasive inclination among seasoned mariners to prioritize tranquil voyages over thrilling expeditions. In their profession, any deviation from the mundane usually signified peril or tribulation. The most successful passages were those that could be concisely encapsulated. We departed, traveled, and arrived safely, all in full adherence to anticipation. As they neared their appointed haven in the late afternoon hours, Dorius redirected his focus entirely to the disembarkation procedure. This particular harbor was more modest in scale than the grand port of Piraeus, possessing a paucity of designated mooring facilities. He meticulously evaluated the aquatic profundity, the pre-existing moored craft, and any conceivable impediments before selecting his trajectory. The ultimate placement of the vessel demanded exacting mastery of its impetus, sufficient momentum to reach the designated berth, but not so much as to hazard impact. Once securely berthed, Dorius aided in the egress of travelers and freight with the identical meticulousness he had exhibited at the point of embarkation. He ascertained from Critias when the merchant anticipated requiring passage back, thereby facilitating his temporal arrangements to allow for the exhibition of his wares, whilst guaranteeing their ability to set sail with adequate diurnal illumination remaining for secure transit. With his departing travelers and freight successfully conveyed, Dorius now needed to obtain compensating freight to ensure the economic viability of the entire voyage. This might entail waiting for previously scheduled voyagers, canvassing for fresh clients among those conspicuously loitering at the quay, or checking with established patrons in this port who might have conveyance requirements. Today, he encountered an agriculturalist with multiple substantial ceramic containers of olive oil necessitating transport to the metropolis of Athens, an uncomplicated consignment that would achieve optimal equilibrium within his craft. Whilst awaiting his predetermined sailing hour, Dorius executed minor upkeep duties, resecuring a worn length of cordage, inspecting for abrasion on the canvas mooring fixtures, and making trifling mends to a timber bench that had manifested a fissure. These continuous incremental rectifications served to avert the escalation of more significant issues and thereby prolong the operational longevity of the craft. He also seized this interval to walk to a proximate purveyor of provisions, acquiring an unpretentious repast of bread, cheese, and dried fish. His eating habits, like most aspects of his work, accorded precedence to utility. Foods that possessed good keeping qualities, demanded no culinary effort, and could be ingested whilst remaining vigilant over his vessel. He ate whilst perched upon the gunwale, his cognizance bifurcated between his meal and his surroundings. The homeward voyage unfolded in a manner largely analogous to the outward passage, modulating propulsion between canvas and manual effort in response to prevailing circumstances. Dorius sustained assiduous scrutiny of both weather and water, ensuring a pleasant yet expeditious transit for all aboard. As they drew near to the port of Piraeus in the crepuscular hours, he piloted amidst a burgeoning nexus of port activity with the serene assurance born of extensive tenure. After mooring his craft and supervising the disembarkation of the oil amphorae, Dorius concluded his diurnal labors with a final inspection of the boat and readying for the subsequent day's expeditions. He stowed valuables susceptible to pilferage, gathered cordage in orderly fashion to avert entanglement, and shielded susceptible components from nocturnal condensation or unforeseen precipitation. Before heading to his humble abode near the harbor, he engaged in concise discourse with other boatmen, who were likewise bringing their daily toil to a close. This interaction transcended simple camaraderie. It was a further modality of intelligence dissemination, sharing observations about evolving states, anomalous occurrences, and prospective commercial ventures. Though these men occasionally vied for clientele, they also upheld a cooperative consortium based on a common vocational fraternity and reciprocal reliance during crises. Throughout this typical diurnal cycle, a day replicated with slight alterations innumerable times across Dorius's working life. He had exhibited proficiencies encompassing piloting, meteorological forecasting, human resource orchestration, commercial bargaining, fundamental upkeep, and corporeal stamina. Yet, in the archived chronicles of the past, or the theatrical reinterpretations of legend, such men are generally depicted solely as the generic ferrymen, should they merit any recognition whatsoever. When Theseus triumphantly journeyed back from the Minoan labyrinth, someone steered that craft securely across the Aegean. When Odysseus at last arrived at his homeland of Ithaca, someone operated the conveyance that bore him. When the inaugural Olympic heralds, sanctioned emissaries, voyaged to proclaim the hallowed cessation of hostilities for the games, someone transported them betwixt literal metropolises. These anonymous enablers, these unsung agents, rendered feasible the linkages, expeditions, and transactions that constituted the very fabric of Hellenic society. The grand epochs that sculpted the very essence of Greek civilization often bring to mind monumental achievements and celebrated figures. Yet, it is imperative to shift our focus and contemplate the myriad unnamed individuals who, in our contemporary existence, facilitate the seamless movement of humanity across the globe. These are the countless, often anonymous professionals whose dedicated efforts ensure the intricate mechanisms of our world continue to turn, making possible every journey and interaction we undertake. These vital contributors encompass a diverse array of roles, including those who expertly operate the sophisticated transportation networks of our modern age, from pilots navigating the skies to engineers steering high-speed trains. They are also the diligent custodians who meticulously maintain our sprawling infrastructure, ensuring the integrity of roads, bridges, and digital conduits. Their collective labor is instrumental in streamlining our expeditions, whether these are tangible voyages across geographical expanses or more abstract, metaphorical progressions through education, commerce, or personal development. Drawing a poignant parallel to Dorius and his industrious ancient boatmen, these contemporary facilitators are the architects of the indispensable linkages that underpin all societal functions. Their tireless work weaves together the fabric of our interconnected world, enabling commerce, communication, and cultural exchange. Despite their foundational importance and the pervasive impact of their contributions, their individual endeavors frequently remain unacknowledged and unlauded within the broader tapestries of our cultural narratives, often overshadowed by more prominent or visible achievements. An intriguing situation presented itself as the directive for textual reformulation was initiated. The established protocol outlined a meticulous process to engage with a provided passage, carefully dissecting its core meaning and structural framework, subsequently reassembling these elements into a new articulation. This rearticulation was to be characterized by an expanded lexicon, a diverse array of grammatical constructions, and an expressive, engaging narrative, all while rigorously adhering to the original length, paragraphing, and sequence of ideas. Furthermore, the instructions emphasized the critical importance of maintaining factual and terminological consistency, ensuring that proper names, specialized terms, and numerical values remained unaltered. The tonal consistency was also paramount, requiring the paraphrased rendition to perfectly mirror the original's stylistic nuances, whether serious, casual, or technical, all within a journalistic narrative framework. However, upon the commencement of this detailed undertaking, a pivotal observation emerged. The essential component, the very source material intended for this comprehensive linguistic transformation, was conspicuously absent. The space designated for the text to be paraphrased remained unfilled, presenting no content upon which to apply the sophisticated techniques of synonym replacement, sentence restructuring, or the strategic addition of illustrative details and examples. Without the foundational text, the prescribed tasks of preserving the main idea, expanding on thoughts to match length, or ensuring the continuation of a specific perspective in the third person became inherently impossible. The entire exercise, therefore, awaited the provision of the necessary textual input, rendering the execution of the detailed paraphrasing instructions temporarily suspended.